Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku was the only student in Class 1A? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. To dream to be the first quirkless hero, you'd have to have a large ego, be a little delusional, and be diagnosed with some kind of disorder. To actually try it, you'd have to be downright insane. Izuku guesses he couldn't argue with that as he continued through the testing grounds with a handmade bat pole thing, a taser, and his own dose of stupidity, recklessness, and determination. From behind the screens, Aizawa Shoyuta couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the student whacking and tazzing robots left and right. From the digital files he pulled up, the student was named Midoriya-Izuku. A plain-looking normal boy raised by a single mother who gained a pretty DMN good score in the written portion of the exam. The real kicker here was that there was a single dash under the quirk portion of the file, which was a universal indicator for being quirkless. As he continued to watch the boy quite literally smash his way through the exam while helping out fellow test-takers, the underground hero couldn't help but have his interest piqued. This year is going to be interesting, he thought as he continued to grade the hero wannabes. Izuku didn't ever think his quirkless self was going to stand in front of Yui as a goddamn student wearing the actual gray uniform and the actual red tie that he didn't know how to tie and the gray pants and the freaking ID. Well, to summarize it bluntly, he was kind of in shock. And if he didn't want to be late for his first day, he really needed to start moving. Taking a deep breath, he squares his shoulders and walked into the huge, very large building like wow, it was humongous. Right? First day, first impressions. He's got this, everything is going to be okay. This wasn't Aldra Middle School where literally everyone thought he was weird and freaky and useless. Taking a deep breath, he slaps both of his cheeks in order to focus, startling someone who was running past him to get to their classroom. He could have sworn he heard them say, literally effing same, as they disappeared around the corner. Blinking, he shook himself out of his anxiety-ridden brain and determinedly ran towards the towering door of 1A. Not taking a moment to hesitate in case the anxiety came back, he threw the door open and let his eyes wander. This was going to be his new class, after all. His class who was. Is that girl straddling the guy with a centaur mutation? Were those inappropriate magazines on one of the guy's desks? Is that girl on the ceiling what the hell? Someone seemed to agree with his sentiments as he heard a very bluntly said, "What the F dash," from behind him. Well, not just anyone apparently, because as Izuku turned around his eyes landed on a man with messy black hair, a black jumpsuit, and a very eye-catching white scarf. Aka Eraserhead. The Eraserhead. As in the underground pro-hero Eraserhead. As in his literal idol. He was cool. Totally. Obviously. You gonna keep staring, kid? Jumping, Izuku felt a blush furiously fester on his cheeks. I'm so sorry, Eraserhead-san. God, he was sweating buckets. What the hell is he supposed to do? This would be the time for the ground to swallow him whole or an asteroid, oh heck. Raising an eyebrow, Shoyuta couldn't help but feel slightly amused and a little impressed. Not many could recognize him. However, not even the clearly anxiety-ridden teen could stop him from angrily placing his attention back on the two brats getting it on in his classroom, the group of girls gossiping about an American Idol, the creepy teen reading Pawn magazines, and the FNG spider student crawling on his DMN ceiling. Clenching his jaw, he already felt a headache forcing its way into his head. He had a very big feeling he was going to be putting a lot of yen into the expel jar the moment he went back to the lounge during lunch. He was not looking forward to it. Izuku was in kind of a doozy. They were only halfway through the day and 8 of his classmates ex-classmates had been expelled. First were the two who were, inappropriately touching each other. Eraser sorry, Aizawa-sensei, oh my god, he was his homeroom teacher, that is so freaking cool, made it clear from the get-go that he didn't tolerate this kind of behavior. The next 5 people to go were kicked out after the quirk apprehension test. The whole thing went off not so good from the start because he didn't show any signs of quirk, which led to some of his classmates complaining about the kid who wasn't even trying. He wasn't hurt, not really. He kind of expected this, to be honest. Izuku had assumed that sensei would just ignore the jabs, but he was shocked when he felt a steady presence by his shoulder. "If all of you must know," he had said, "Midoriya-senpai is quirkless, and so far, he is the only one I'm getting even a lick of heroic potential from." After that, the murmurs toned down slightly. Although what Sensei said did nothing to stop the dirty looks being sent his way, his heart felt warm after the praise and defense. No teacher has ever done that before, not even when the bullying got really bad and he was sent to the hospital that one time in middle school. He always had to be the one to dig himself out, which is why he took up multiple extracurriculars, i.e. dance and Arnie's martial arts, in an effort to do more than just dream. His mother was confused the first time he asked, of course, but immediately agreed after she saw how happy it made him. And as he ended up being the last one standing, or well, pushing in the push-up assessment, he felt the fruition of those many years of torture with Dewa-sensei and her painful, horrible, no-good crab hold that almost choked him to death every time she decided he was being sloppy. Happy thoughts, Izuku, happy thoughts. So far, although Yui was turning out to be filled with a lot of surprises, he didn't fully take in how cutthroat and serious the institution was until Aizawa-sensei called out the names of 5 of his classmates like a death sentence. Fukumoto, Arima, Hiroka, Yasada, Yamamura, he had announced, "All of you took this test with the seriousness of a 5-year-old and didn't give me any kind of indicator of the hero that you're trying to be. This is not a game. It's better you learn this now than never. You're all expelled. Go get your bags and head to the principal's office for any other questions. The rest of you passed, but don't assume you're in the clear just yet. That's all, dismissed." And then from 18, they became 13. "I think I'm gonna faint," he thought as he imagined every single situation where he could have messed up and gone home with empty, broken dreams. After that eventful and harrowing experience came the, thankfully, normal classes with his teachers who were also pro-heroes, which was freaking awesome. "I can't believe ectoplasm is teaching me math," he thought to himself as he listened to his pro-hero teacher explain the equation of a line. "Y=mx plus b will be in my brain forever." Everything was going pretty well, and it even felt like there were going to be no more heart attack-inducing threats of expulsion, until Ectoplasm finished his discussion and called on one of his classmates with a dark expression on his face. "Inomoto-kun, I hope you realize we have zero tolerance for the misbehavior and harassment of our students. If you could please keep your eyes on the board and refrain from using your quirk to spy under your classmates' skirts, you can grab your things and head straight to the principal's office where I will be sending Aizawa-sensei to decide your punishment," he said, deep voice placing the fear of God into the perverted boy. A little cockroach then revealed itself crawling down from the chair leg of one of the more gifted girls in the class, Hattori-san, and then promptly keeled over and died before Inomoto-san practically ran out of the classroom with his tail between his legs. Izuku couldn't help but feel slightly satisfied when he ran. Acting like that was just downright disgusting, and if anyone ever did that with his mother, not even All Might could stop him from sucker punching a guy like that in the face. So, for the first time today, Izuku felt his subconscious say good riddance. This kind of pattern continues on throughout the week until there were literally only 3 students left in Class 1A. Izuku couldn't help but feel like they were being picked off one by one as if they were in some kind of horror movie. Every single time Aizawa-sensei or some other teacher had that look in their eyes, what one of his fellow survivors, Chiba-kun, deemed as the expel stare, he felt dread course through his veins and started praying to the gods in hopes of surviving another day. "Yo, Midoriya-kun," his classmate called out to him, the other survivor, Fujita-chan. "Do you have an extra pen?" A little surprised she was addressing him directly, he stammered out a yes and quickly gave her a pen. Although the class shrunk down to only him, Chiba-kun, and Fujita-chan, the two were still slightly standoffish to him because of his quirkless status. They didn't seem to really care for him at the beginning, but with every expulsion that didn't include him, the two naturally became more and more incredulous and prejudiced against him. In fact, he's caught them laughing about him behind his back more than a few times during English class with present Mike, since the blonde-haired hero had a tendency to ramble and lose himself in the lesson. Izuku didn't mind it at all since it proved he was really passionate about teaching, but the other two just often used it as an opportunity to talk about him during the rare times they weren't being watched. "Thanks," she said, smiling. He nervously smiled back and went back to his work wondering what the hell just happened. Which is exactly when he realized there was a caterpillar in front of the class. Wait a second, is that? Izuku's sweat dropped. Sensei? Are you okay? He stammered out, still kind of in shock as his teacher kept drinking from the juice box he wasn't even holding. Izuku felt himself just ignoring it. He was going to ignore this and go back to his modern art history assignment that he had to give to Kayama-sensei tomorrow. He was going to just roll with it. He had to, or else he was never going to come out of Yui sane and alive. 3 more years, huh? He thought, considering I even make it to 3 years. By dismissal time, Izuku was just about ready to expel himself in order to stop wasting time. Chiba, Fujita, get your things and head to the principal's office. You're expelled on the account of framing another student for vandalism, as well as verbal bullying according to present mic, Aizawa-sensei drawls out, almost bored. The other 2 students widen their eyes and try to refuse the accusation, but sensei looks like he's not even listening. As the 2 walk out with scowls, their eyes flit over to him for a second and he practically feels the hatred coming from their combined glares. Looking down at his desk, Izuku wills himself to push back the shadow of tears in his eyes before taking a deep breath and standing up with his backpack in hand. Turning towards his now only student, Shoyuta wonders what he's trying to pull as he comes towards him. Sensei, he starts, if you're going to expel me too, just do it now please. I don't think I can take any more. He almost begs. Frowning, the underground hero sighs. It seems that his only student, who was also quirkless, had a case of low self-esteem, which really isn't all that shocking now that he really ponders on it. Oh well, he was paid to kick his students' buttes into shape, which he was good at, but he was also paid to help them out in some ways emotionally, which he was not good at. With another sigh, the haggard teacher steps out of his sleeping bag and properly faces his student. Midoriya, he starts. From the start, I already knew that the class was going to be rough, but after the assessment I knew it was much more than that. To be quite frank, this was the worst batch of kids I ever had to handle since I started teaching. Although it's only been a week, I could already tell that none of them had what it took to become a hero. Izuku flinches as if he was burned, and the tears slowly start to fester. This was it, he was going to get expelled. Aizawa mentally grimaces at the same time. Didn't he say he wasn't good at this? However, I never, not even once, felt that way about you. And all your other teachers seem to agree with me. Wide-eyed, Izuku looks up to see the smirking face of his sensei, his eyes a little softer than usual. Even though you're quirkless, a supposed disability, you never once backed down from a challenge according to your practical heroics teacher, and in every single class, you never fail to pay attention and learn. In that assessment, I'll be honest, I wasn't really expecting much. However, your raw potential blew me away. Izuku Midoriya, as long as you continue to have this attitude, one that desires to learn and improve in order to be the best hero they can be, then I guarantee that you will not be getting expelled anytime soon. Trembling, Izuku finally lets the tears he's been holding back fall silently down his face. Never in his life did he have a teacher, much less an authority figure, that had even this much faith in him, and Izuku's shielded heart opens one of the many locks on the door. Thank you, sensei. He says, smiling brightly even as tears and snot covered his childish baby face. He's going to be a problem child, isn't he? Shoyuta thinks, a little resigned. Yeah. You're dismissed early since I assume you already finished your homework for midnight's class. Izuku nods. All right, you can retire for the day, Midoriya. My last homework for the day is for you to stop doubting yourself. It's long-term, so make sure to keep working on it. Now scram. Hi, sensei. Thank you, he says, standing a little straighter, a little more confident, a little more purposeful. Aizawa secretly smirks to himself as the boy practically dashes out of the room. Like he said, this year was going to be interesting. Being the only student of a class had prompted a lot of changes, especially in his curriculum. Since he had no other classmates, there were a lot of slots in his timetable where he would be having some one-on-one tutoring with his teachers. In others, he would be joining 1B, 1F, and even 1I on certain days. Since he was quirkless, Aizawa-sensei reasoned that he needed to be as prepared as possible. Because of that, the next 3 years were positively going to be hell. He was going to be switching from fighting mock villains to creating support items to how to make sure the media doesn't eat you alive. It was a tasking schedule, but it was one Izuku was ready to take on in order to be a hero. Izuku already made peace with the fact that he was going to be working 10 times harder than the others because of his lack of quirk, even before entering Yui. All he has to do now is to make sure he doesn't die in the process. Easy, he thinks as he tries to make sense of what Majima-sensei was doing with an electric gun and some scraps of leather. Izuku is glad to say that 1B is almost nothing like his previous classmates. After Ishiyama-sensei, the homeroom teacher of 1B, announced his presence in their class during Mondays and Thursdays, the class took to Izuku like fish in water. Even after hearing about his quirkless status, most of the class still talked to him with genuine smiles. Most being the keyword. There were a few in class who immediately changed their attitude towards him after they heard, but Izuku didn't pay them any mind because wow, he was actually making friends. The same happened in 1F, since most of the kids there cared more about their machines than their quirks. 1I took his status as a challenge and an opportunity to practice their marketing pitches. After all, he was practically aiming to be the first quirkless hero. The business students took that challenge with smiles that eerily reminded him of Aizawa-sensei. With that, a friendship, or in business terms a partnership, was established between the single hero in training with the entirety of Class 1I. Fun. What are you working on, Midoriya? Shoyuta asked his sole student. They were in the remodeled classroom of 1A, one that had 2 chairs and desks instead of 20. The extra space was dedicated to planting shelves of books, cabinets of support items, and practice worksheets. Sometimes, the classroom was treated like a second teacher's lounge, all of the pro-hero educators quickly becoming familiar and even fond of the anxiety-ridden teen through the one-on-one tutoring. It's kind of childish to be honest, the freckled boy said sheepishly. He thought that the analysis notebooks would be put on hold the moment he entered Yui, but if anything, he was just itching to write in it more. All the quirks and personalities of the pro-heroes and the students were so interesting, after all. Humor me, Shoyuta said. Okay, ever since I was young I loved heroes and quirks, so I started talking about them in a series of notebooks I called Quirk Analysis for the Future, he explained, showing his idol-turned teacher the cover of his notebook. The pro-hero hummed when he saw the tiny writing below the bold title. Volume 14? Why yeah. It's become a hobby of sorts, I guess. Whenever there's a hero fight, I'm usually on the front lines writing down everything I see. I analyze the situation and the quirk as much as I can and provide improvements of my own. Just like last week when Best Jeanist came to Mizudafu to assist in the takedown of a villain and used his quirk to use the fur on the villain's body as a weapon, which really makes me think that the term fabric is kind of vague. Because Atimplius the Thekan just doesn't a type material that. Midoriya, Shoyuta interrupts, slightly exasperated yet amused. One thing he's learned as a teacher to this single student is that the green-haired boy tends to ramble when he's particularly passionate about something. It was endearing once you got used to it. Sorry, Sensei. I'm still working to keep that in check, he says, blushing as he scratches his cheek. It's fine, Shoyuta amends. If it's all right with you, can I see the notebook? Oh, sure. Izuku exclaims, handing over the notebook almost gently. While you read, I'll just finish the hero management homework due tomorrow. I'm pretty sure Adachi-kun is going to raid my bag tomorrow for it so that the whole class can compare and teach me the proper way to do it in the most scary way possible. He says, voice gradually getting softer as he thinks about another day of hell in 1I. Snorting softly at his students' ramblings and misery, Shoyuta opened the stained, lovingly worn notebook and started reading from the very beginning. Aizawa-kun, I hope this will be a pleasant appointment. I certainly hope you're not about to expel your only student left, Nedzu gently teased, comfortably sipping his tea. Sighing, Shoyuta simply placed down a single notebook on the principal's desk. On the contrary, I don't think I could expel that kid even if I tried. This is just one more reason to add to the pile. He says, smirking. I think you'll have some fun reading that one. The hybrid animal tilted his head, and Shoyuta could have sworn his beady eyes gleamed. I'll let you know then, Aizawa-kun, and if what you're implying is true, I'll return this notebook to Midoriya-kun himself with a little change in his timetable. Finishing his tea, Netsu let himself smile. It's time I have some of my own one-on-one interaction with our special student, he cheerfully says, causing a shiver to go down Shuta's spine. The pro-hero can do nothing else but say a small prayer for his only student, hoping that he comes out of this somewhat sane. Midoriya Inko loved her son. She really did. Honey. But it was times like these where she wondered if she accidentally dropped him as a child. Mom, I swear this will make sense in like an hour, he says, chicken feathers all over his body. His room was filled with small little items and machinery parts, and if she looked close enough, she could almost swear she saw a bowling ball with a night light attached to it. Okay, sweetie. I'll be making dinner in the kitchen, just come out in an hour and you can show me what's going on, alright? She said, causing him to give her a greasy thumbs up. As she walks out of her son's room, she can't help but wonder what Yui was doing to her only child. Laughing to herself in bewilderment, she forced herself to trudge on into the kitchen. Even with all of Izuku's little quirks and whatever that was, she was still so very proud of her little boy. Smiling, she let herself fall into her usual routine of dancing around the kitchen. The house was warm as she listened to the sounds of building coming from Izuku's room, anticipation building up in her heart. She couldn't wait to see what he made. I call this hope and pain, Izuku deadpants. Flashing his presentation to the image of scared hostages, he turns to Asano-kun from 1B who could turn his legs to a composition as hard as diamond. On his chest was a paper with the word, villain, written in fat black strokes. Without wasting a second, Izuku rolls the bowling ball, changes the scared hostages' presentation to happy ones when the light turns on in nice colors, and lets the bowling ball promptly hit Asano-kun. Leaning down, Asano-kun tries to pick up the ball when it suddenly opens and sprays him with chicken feathers with a hidden chemical compound, rendering him unconscious. Majima-sensei blinks. Thank you. Izuku sits back down as the other support students clap, discussing how they could make a mini version of the newly named Chicken Pop. Majima-sensei sighs deeply. Izuku wonders if his martial arts training was all for naught as his eyes meet the beautiful, green grass for the umpteenth time that day. Kill me now. Sorry kid, but killing children isn't in my pay grade. I can do it myself. Then I won't get paid. Sensei, you are my literal idol, but I want to be as far away from you as possible right now. Aizawa-sensei can only grin scarily. Perfect. If there was a permanent imprint of his face now on Yui grounds with the expression of pain and suffering, Izuku wouldn't know what to tell you. And if Shoyuta felt his heart warm from hearing the word idol, nobody needed to know. When Izuku walked into class 1A expecting another day of studying, Aizawa-sensei gave him his signature fear-inducing smile and told him that he and some second years would be going on a field trip instead. Wait a minute, second years? Why not with class 1B? He asked. 1B is in the middle of a pop quiz right now. Remember Midoriya, your timetable is very different compared to just about anyone else in the school. Unlike theirs, yours is much more flexible and easy to manipulate. Shoyuta explained. Now, the bus will be stationed outside the gate in 5 minutes. In the meantime, Izuku could only gasp as his teacher pressed a button on the remote in his hand, a metal box reminding him of a locker emerging from the wall opposite the door. You can go and put on your costume. Usually we would have given it to you sooner, but because of your situation we prioritized the others first. If anything's wrong with it, tell me and I'll send in a complaint. I'll be waiting at the bus. Don't make the second years wait for you, kid. With that, Shoyuta ducks out of the classroom with a satisfied smirk on his face. Seeing the problem child lose his head because of shock is never going to get old. Looking into the mirror, Izuku couldn't help but slightly tear up. He and his mother had designed his hero costume together, and he still remembers the day that they did it with clarity. It was when he broke down in front of her, spilling all of his insecurities and doubts about his ability to be a hero. He remembers her soft, gentle hands as they cupped his face, telling him what he yearned to hear that one day so long ago. Izuku, she whispered, smiling. I realize now that what I said all those years ago was wrong. She breathed out shakily. You've proven that to me when you took those classes, when you stopped at nothing to help others, when you actually got into Yui. Izuku, I don't know anyone else who deserves this more than you. At this point, tears ran freely down both mother and son's faces. You're going to be an amazing hero, Izuku, she exclaims. And I'll always be there to support you. Izuku launched himself at his mother with a wail, and they spent the rest of the day designing his costume with bright eyes and wobbly smiles. Dark green and black stared back at him, his hand playing with the mask covering his eyes and half of his face. Dark, steel-toed boots covered his feet while gray shoulder pads and knee pads protected his costume and joints from damage. Eskrima sticks were equipped at his back with the ability to produce electricity and merge into one bow staff for long-range attacks. Finally, a utility belt sat full around his waist. A grappling hook and a new and improved version of the chicken pop, being one of the many items included for support. Smiling, Izuku couldn't help but feel ready for anything. At the end of the little field trip to USJ, Izuku was able to learn 3 things. 1. He needed to get thermal vision and night vision installed in his mask. 2. He was a beast at rocky terrains because of his balance and agility. Thank you, dance classes. And 3. Mirio-senpai, Tamaki-senpai, and Nijire-senpai were the coolest people he's ever met after Aizawa-sensei. All in all, Class 2A was a lot of fun. Midoriya-kun. Izuku said a small prayer in his head before tilting his head up to meet Tsukishima-kun's pointed stare. Yes, Tsukishima-kun? The blonde rests his chin in his hand, using his middle finger to push up the middle of his glasses. The lenses glint under the bright fluorescent lights, the intimidating vision reminding Izuku of an anime character. Do you think Adachi-kun is correct in his assumptions about the homework? Well, the hero in training starts. Considering I'm more of a quirk analyst than a profile analyst, I think Adachi-kun is coming from the right place. I didn't even stop to consider how Emily-senpai's ethnicity could be used as a driving force in making her image more appealing to the public. Like he said, it could prove good or bad depending on how many people are more traditionalist and close-minded. Considering Japan is a high-context country, I wouldn't put it past people to underestimate her ability to help Japanese people specifically, especially when it comes to the rescue and comfort portion of the job. However, at the same time, having a foreigner hero in Japan also appeals to the youth. This could also bring other foreigners to Japan, increasing more hero hopefuls willing to do good. I wouldn't say I'm wrong, but I can't say I'm completely right either. After all, even though quirks come into play and determine how will she'll be accepted. Midoriya-kun. Izuku shut his mouth, flushing to the tips of his ears. He really needs to work on his mumbling habit. Basically, he stammers out. What I'm trying to say is that Adachi-kun has the stronger argument. The blonde mutters, turning around. He then promptly sinks into the floor. The freckled boy's brain short-circuits. Izuku can do nothing but stare at puddle on the floor, brain trying to understand what the hell he just witnessed. The puddle on the floor only tells him one thing. I may or may not have failed this homework. Because both arguments are absent from my paper. The puddle stares into his soul, and Izuku can do nothing but internally scream. Izuku didn't know what he was more terrified of. His mother when she got disappointed, Aizawa-sensei's smile, or Principal Nedzu's stare. When the principal of Yui came knocking at his classroom after lunch a week prior, Izuku expected he was there to talk to Yamada-sensei. He certainly didn't expect Principal Nedzu to instead turn to him and inform him of his new schedule. Starting today, you will be having analysis classes with me in your timetable. Please do bring the rest of your analysis notebooks for our first session tomorrow. I'm quite eager to look over them for our lesson. That's all. Sorry for the interruption, Yamada-kun. After that, Nedzu-sensei, as he wanted to be called, worked him like there was no tomorrow. Mind games, psychological tests, extreme analyzation. Nedzu-sensei was a nightmare dressed in fur and mouse ears. His stare as he asked Izuku a question made the freckled boy wonder if the principal had a hidden truth quirk. He could never lie when faced with those twinkling, beady eyes. Even with all of these things, however, Izuku was actually learning more and more every session. Netsu had explained to him that although quirk analysis was important, there were other factors that played into a person as well. This was how his psychological analysis started. Being a quirkless hero, your mind will be your greatest weapon, the hybrid creature explained, hands folded neatly on his desk. One especially important factor that makes a person human is their emotions. By being able to dissect and understand small details about their person, you may be able to manipulate them to your will without needing to engage in violence. For example, there is a serial killer on the loose who specifically murders recently divorced couples. By analyzing his pictures, you may be able to spot a tan line on his ring finger that can indicate that he may have been married once himself. By using this information, you may be able to conjure a character profile. Obviously, the man may be feeling some resentment towards his separated other, and is therefore taking his frustrations out on these people. This analysis could be used against the killer when in confrontation, especially as a way of distraction or stalling. In a way, you must learn to act like a detective. Sherlock, if you will, he says, Izuku listening and hanging on to his every word. In your second year, I plan to bring you into the field to test your analysis. Now, however, we will have to start from the basics and build your way up to analyzing old case files. If you are able to master this by your third year, you will acquire a major advantage in the field as a hero. Are you ready to start? Of course, Izuku had said yes, no hesitation in the mix. Do you think you're ready, kid? Izuku took a deep breath. He could feel the fabrics of Yui's gym uniform hugging his body from all sides, the air of his own breath, the sounds of his own heartbeat. Even from here, he could hear all the screams from the other end of the tunnel. It doesn't matter if I am, Sensei, he replies, his expression tired but with a glint of something in his eyes. A glint that told Shoyuta more than enough. All I know is that I'm going to give my very best. He could hear Snipe Sensei from the commentary box riling up the crowd into excitement. Izuku let his eyes close as he coaxed his mind into calming down, letting the noise around him cancel out into nothing but mumbles. It was almost time. Good luck, kid. I'll be cheering you on. Izuku smiled brightly, and Aizawa-sensei reaches over to ruffle his messy locks. He felt motivated. When Snipe-sensei said his cue, Izuku started walking. His footsteps felt as though they got louder every step he took. Facing forward, he could only see the light at the end of the tunnel. His first step to proving to everyone. It was time to prove to everyone that he welcomed the only student of Class 1A, Midoriya Izuku. The screams deafened his ears, and he let himself drown. Time to win this, he thought, smirking. He was ready. The sports festival was one of the most stressful, yet exciting events Izuku ever had the honor to participate in. The 3 challenges dished out to him and his peers throughout the day were nothing short of tasking and demanding. The maze was the easiest task. He had figured his way out by climbing to the top and using the advantageous height to spot the exit. It was only a few minutes too late that the others got the same idea as him, as his foot was already just meters away from the exit. There were many attempts of sabotage, but Izuku was nothing if not constantly alert because of Aizawa-sensei's training, his body recognizing the signs of danger and sharply dodging before a hand could even be laid on him. It was like this that he pressed the buzzer, signaling the winner of the first event. The second challenge was a little more complicated as it was a team play. More specifically, they were engaging in Capture the Flag. They had to come up with 2 teams to play the game, and as the host of this year's festival, Present Mike, had said, the losing team would immediately be disqualified from the next round. It was complete chaos after that, but Izuku had a good head on his shoulders and quickly tried to analyze the people around him, 1/3 of which he knew somewhat personally. He had a plan. Recruiting the members was a surprisingly easy task, as most of the people he approached had more or less the same reason for why they accepted. I trust your judgment, Midoriya-kun. Izuku didn't know whether to be flattered or concerned, and in the end just decided to ponder on it later. Eventually, the 10-minute prep time was up and it was time to play. Wearing the blue band of his team around his bicep, his eyes were glued to the prize. In the end, his teammates all cheered as he sat atop the pole holding the red team's flag, waving it like a statement of victory to whoever was watching. And finally, the most awaited event of all, the one-on-one battles. This was the hardest obstacle of all to get through because of the many diverse quirks. The other support sections and the Gen Edition course that he didn't have a chance to interact with all too much, aside from them being in his team, gave him hell when they were in the stadium. He couldn't ask for anything more. After many bloody battles and 500 reprimands from Recovery Girl, Izuku made it to the finals and faced off against one of his good friends in Class 1B, a recommended student. The fight was brutal and had everyone digging their fingers into their seats. Izuku had never felt more alive and exhausted. Sweat dripped down his face in waves, but he forced his muscles to keep going, to keep moving because Izuku was nothing less than a fighter, and hell if he was going to give up now. Had enough yet, Mido-kun? Iwata-chan yelled from the other end of the stadium, blood running down her elbow and onto the floor. Her eyes were wild and sharp, a dangerous and challenging smile on her face as she goaded him back into battle. Not even close. He had yelled, flashing a toothy smile to his friend. Blood ran down his temple, but the only thing in his mind at that moment was that he needed to win. The two clashed in a flurry of punches and short-range attacks, the crowd around them cheering so loud they could be heard from outside the stadium. The recommended student with a strength compiling quirk versus the quirkless student with endless determination. No one could see a clear winner, and they ate it all up like dogs. To summarize, his first sports festival was something he was never going to forget. Even though he didn't win. He guesses that second place isn't too bad either though. His mother hung the medal up like a family heirloom when he came home to her tears and hugs. When he came to class after the holidays given to the students after the festival, Aizawa-sensei had greeted him with a hair ruffle and a proud smile, his eyes soft and gleaming. Good job. Izuku could only beam at his favorite hero and teacher, warmth blooming in his chest. His internship with ProHero Bungie could only be described as an experience and a half. If Izuku had learned anything at all, it had to have been that stealth could make or break your mission. Also, pickup lines are a very effective way to distract a villain from a sneak attack. Midoriya, I didn't think you had it in you, he said, laughing merrily. His feet constantly bounced on the concrete floor, ignoring his intern's alarming state. Izuku covered his masked face in his hands, whimpering and blushing the whole ride back to the agency. The criminal at the back fared no better, avoiding eye contact with the cute boy in front with the angelic smile and surprisingly good pickup lines. When Aizawa-sensei had asked about his experience when he came back, Izuku could only tell him what came to his mind at that exact moment. I told a villain that I lost my phone number and asked her if I could have hers instead, and now I can never show my face to the outside world again. Shoyuta could have sworn he heard Hizashi cackling at the back of his mind. The summer camp Izuku shared with 3B was nothing short of hell and chaos. Honestly, Tanaka-senpai passed out on the ground with spikes holding him up like some kind of sacrifice was probably the least crazy thing that happened. Why wasn't I allowed to go with 1B again? Izuku asked later, eye twitching as he stood soaked to the bone in a goo he couldn't name. He'd have to ask Majima-sensei later, because they need to place their attention there. Oddly enough, it feels like their performance is affected by your presence. Aizawa-sensei replies, offhandedly, you just want to torture me. Izuku sighs as Emily-senpai, he still couldn't believe how many foreigners were in the school, dragged him away to act as the villain they needed to catch. At least he knows how to run away in 5 different terrains now, right? Izuku wills himself not to cry as Recovery Girl pulls out the urchin that got stuck to his foot. Shoyuta watches by the sidelines, half concerned and half amused as hell. Is he okay yet? We were thinking of doing one more test run. Izuku turns to Shoyuta with eyes as desperate as his when he needed his morning coffee. Shoyuta sighs and walks out, telling everyone to politely F off. Izuku kind of hates his teacher, but the love comes back full force in a matter of seconds. Sensei, we shall have a summer wedding. Shut up, problem child. Inko couldn't help but worry about her baby as he spent the last few days studying for, and she quotes, the biggest test I'm ever going to take in my short, measly life. Honestly, If you told her that her son would take up dark humor as a coping mechanism, she would laugh in your face and then make you tea to apologize. Now, however, sighing, all she asks from the gods above is that her Izuku at least puts on his clothes the right way this time. It was not fun trying to get his arms out of the jeans he used to wear when he was 10. A sudden crash startled her from her musings. Oh my god, I found the site the pop quizzes are based from. Oh my go. Inko smiles warily and slowly backs out of the hallway. She can only pray. Taking a test that was meant for 3 separate courses in a classroom alone with only your sadistic teacher at the front does absolutely nothing to help Izuku's mental health, but oh well, not like it wasn't already shot to hell anyways. Case in point, as time steadily passed by, his anxiety turned more into a mini Aizawa-sensei telling him that he was being dumb and illogical. He's not sure if that's supposed to be helpful, but honestly, who gives a heck anymore? He certainly didn't. He lost all of those the moment he got into a debate with Sahara-chan about why Yamada-sensei would look better with Aizawa-sensei instead Kiyama-sensei. And then right after that, arguing about who would have better marketing if either's wedding would be a thing. Least to say, after pulling out statistics about gay rights, arguments about the appeal of polar opposites, and the different style of the same job they were working, most of the management course in one I had agreed with him and promptly started making plans to push the two together no matter what it took. So yeah, Izuku seriously does not give a heck right now. Except if he fails, where if he does he's going to tear the whole school down with his quirkless hands and no one was going to stop him because woo, he worked way too DMN hard for this. Stop thinking, problem child. Shut up, sensei, he murmured, pouting. His real teacher could only glance at him with both eyebrows raised in confusion and bewilderment. After a few seconds though, Shoyuta shrugged and got back to reading. The Harry Potter series was surprisingly nice to read. Shoyuta didn't even glance at the doom and gloom coming from his only student just a few feet away. Hey, Mido-kun, how's it going? Lunch Rush asked as the green-haired boy walked up to get some soba. Izuku could only stare at him with soulless eyes. Fine. Lunch Rush sweat dropped as he watched him walk towards his friends in Class 1B, and then jumped in shock as the first year promptly passed out right on top of his soba noodles. After that, there was a sudden spike in religiosity among the teachers, no one willing to admit their prayers for the continued stability of their sweet, hard-working, on the verge of death, student. Izuku was trying to make himself a grappling hook when Kahara-chan shoved a letter right into his filthy face. Sputtering, the boy snatched the letter from her hand. Chi-chan. I'm sorry, Izuku and I was excited. They're your test results. Come on, open it. Open it. Chi-chan, I will actually shove grease into your mouth and then my mouth because I think I'm going to die any second now. Oh god, what if I failed? What if they kicked me out and this is the notice? What do I tell my mother? Stop being illogical and open the DMN letter, Midoriya. Chill out, Izuku. I'm sure you'll be fine. If it's anything bad, you just call me and I'll forge you a letter in no time. She exclaimed proudly. With that, she steals the pack of Doritos on his workbench and walks out the way she came from, leaving him without comfort food. Sighing as if he were an old man taking his last breath, he opens the letter with the gentleness of holding a newborn baby. Gulping, he takes out the neatly folded letter and opens it until he can see the entirety of his academic notice. Midoriya Izuku Hybrid Course. Primary Course, Heroics. Overall score, 195-200. General Knowledge Academics, 50-50. Heroics, 50-50. Support, 48-50. Management, 47-50. Status, Passed. Level, Advanced. Please await for the practical assessment before asking for final grades. Plus Ultra. Running out the support classrooms, bypassing Majima-sensei, his friends, and Yui as a whole, he steps on the grassy grounds where he had his first quirk assessment and promptly screams. Taking a deep breath, he starts to laugh even as tears stream down his cheeks in waves, his happiness outshining any inner demon in his head. Heck, even Mental Sensei was smiling at him from the back of his mind. He did it. He passed. He passed with flying colors and with only 5 freaking mistakes. Letting himself free fall onto the ground behind him, he smiles at the sun beating down on his face and lets himself finally pass out. Shoyuta couldn't help but smile proudly at his problem child, even if he thought screaming and disturbing literally everyone on the second year's side of the building was not a method of celebration. Even so, he kept a steady hold on the exhausted boy in his arms, freckled hands weakly clutching the test results as if it was going to disappear any moment into thin air. After Shoyuta had set him down on an infirmary bed, he informed Chiyo-san of what happened and left. God knows the boy deserves the sleep. Stepping into the teacher's lounge, more than a dozen eyes stared back at him as if waiting for confirmation that the scream wasn't one of despair. Hizashi was practically on the verge of crushing the stress ball in his hand, while Namuri and Ken were subtly pacing back and forth in worry. The rest of the teachers assigned to Midoriya fared the same way. "Relax," he said, giving his fellow coworkers an amused smirk. The kid practically passed out from a mixture of happiness and exhaustion. A 195-200 is nothing to laugh at, don't you think? The whole teacher's lounge erupted into cheers and celebration. Least to say, the first half of the school year was kind of maybe super actually very much torture. To finally finish it off, there was only one last obstacle left. The practical exam. Izuku felt as prepared as a duck, but no turning back now. When Aizawa-sensei got into position to perform his favorite move, a judo flip that was the cause of his face tattoo on the ground, Izuku's tired muscles and brain didn't even think twice about grabbing his arms to stop him and sweeping the pro hero's feet from right under him. When he jumped, Izuku probably did the most stupid thing up to date. Smartest, mental sensei countered. He headbutt Eraserhead. As in, gave a nose bleed to him in the process. As in he hurt his idol. As in he should probably go die in a ditch somewhere right about now, oh god. His sensei, on the other hand, had a very different opinion on his dilemma if his scary smile was anything to go by. "Good, Midoriya. Now, try to dodge this." And their dance continued. If Izuku knew any better, he would say that his exhaustion was the cause of his good performance today. Maybe he thought, the key is not to think about what you're doing until you're in the process of doing it. Sensei then flips over him, using his shoulders as support as he practically slams him into the ground. Nope. Yawning, Izuku rubbed his eyes as the gentle roaring of the train filled his ears. It was another tiring day at UE as the practical exams came closer. Usually, the major tests would be given before summer camp, but since he was a special case, there wasn't really any point in giving him extra classes during the outing. Instead, they made it worse and subjected him to 3. Izuku shudders, mental flashes of the traumatic time going through his head. He would say never again, but Aizawa-sensei and Nedzu-sensei were the type of people to subject him to things even worse than that just for their amusement. Phantom tears rolled down his face at the thought. Even then, Izuku couldn't help but smile tiredly. Although Yui was working him to the bone, he could feel himself getting stronger every single day. His once impossible dream of being the first quirkless hero was just getting that much more tangible as the days passed by. He's truly come a long way from who he used to be before. A younger blonde crossed his mind for a brief moment before he shut it out. It was no use thinking about could-have-beens. He just hoped that Yui would knock some sense into him, since he couldn't. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a ding from his phone. Pulling it out of his pocket, Izuku opened up his message app. 4:15 p.m. I know you're probably tired, sweetheart, but if you could stop by the grocery store and get some soy sauce on the way, that would be wonderful. As he finished reading, the train came to a stop and parked by the station. The area wasn't really that far from Yui, he mused. There was no harm in going to the nearest store and getting some soy sauce. Making up his mind, he texted his mother back saying that it was all right and stepped out of the train, making his way to the nearest store. It was only when he stepped off that he realized that the sun was going down and that the station was slightly deserted. Focus, mental sensei admonished. Shaking his head, he quickly made his way to the small grocery store nearby and bought the food item. Thanking the cashier, he made his way out and set his sights on the train station once again when he suddenly heard running footsteps. His small plastic bag fell out of his hand when a small body suddenly collided with his. It was a fairly normal day, If you consider training super-powered children into becoming heroes normal, that is. And Shoyuta found himself lounging on the floor of the teacher's lounge in his sleeping bag. The last time he tried the couch, it smelt like days' worth of spilt coffee and Hisashi's overbearing and loud personality, so excuse him if he thought the floor was a much better option. The sky was on the verge of transitioning from a light, sunny blue to the pinks and oranges of dawn when Shoyuta realized that he overslept and that Midoriya was probably dismissed. Grunting, he sat up and pushed himself out of his little cocoon of safety and quiet. The soft small talk in the lounge told him that most of the teachers had already left for their patrols or homes, and Shoyuta couldn't help but look forward to the same after another tiring day of teaching. Although technically the only real student he was handling is Midoriya, he was doing his best to scout out the hero potential in the general education courses. If he could offer guidance to someone who really wanted it like the problem child, he would give it. What doesn't make it easy is trying to find the potential hidden behind their attitudes. Sighing, the underground pro-hero packed up for the day and nodded goodbye to the few still in the room. He knew Maijima was going to stay to look after the few geniuses in his support class. He hopes he doesn't find gray hairs on him anytime soon. Just as he was making his way out of the imposing gates of Yui, his work phone starts to ring. He thought, if anyone needed me, why didn't they stop me before going out? Reaching into his pocket, he unsheathes his phone and blinks in surprise at the caller. Problem child? Shoyuta had given his work number to the kid in case of any emergencies. In the past half year of his stay in Yui, he didn't get a single call from the kid, knowing he took his warning to heart and didn't bother him with things he could deal with on his own. Knowing this, Shoyuta couldn't help but feel his chest coil in slight dread. Answering the call, he put his phone to his ear. Hello? A sensei? Can you hear me? Frowning, the hero felt the coil start to tighten. The tone he was using immediately flared up his ingrained training and brought him to full alertness. It's me, kid, what's going on? He stuttered, I'm kind of hiding in an alley, I found this girl and she was crying and asking for my help and I couldn't just leave her alone and now there's this guy in a plague mask that's following us showing no signs of his Korkandai don't know wadido. Midoriya, he interrupted, what's the first step to dealing with panic? The only sounds he heard for a few seconds were Midoriya's uneven breaths before he finally replied in a much calmer voice. Clear your H-head and think about your priorities. Find something to focus on. Good. I want you to focus on my voice, okay? Can you tell me where you are specifically? Any landmarks or signs that can clue me in to where you might be? He asked, already running towards his parked car. I saw a coffee shop nearby before Eri and I hid in the alley, I think it was Mura's cafe. There's also a traffic light nearby, if that helps. We're in the shadier parts of town, there was a grocery store and Mom asked me to buy soy sauce and so I just went until I met Eri. We're a few blocks away from there I think. He takes a deep breath. Sensei. Something's wrong. The man trying to follow us, he gives me a bad feeling. Shoyuta was already making his way towards the station, the phone perched on the cup holder when he registered the fearful tone of his student. God, he was just a first year. It's okay, just remember what we discussed, alright? Keep a level head and never keep your guard down. Survey your surroundings and think of possible escape routes. And always be ready for an attack. I remember. The confidence in his voice, though warranting a little pride, did nothing to settle the coil in his chest. Good, that's good. I'll be nearby Mura's cafe in about 15 minutes. You think you can make your way there without being seen? The pause. I think so. You think you can do it, Eri? Shoyuta faintly heard the telltale sounds of mumbling in the background before his student got back to him. We have to be careful. According to Eri, the guy is dangerous and has a scary quirk. I don't know where he is right now, but I'm going to stick close to the shadows and try to get us there. Clutching the steering wheel tight, Shoyuta willed the car to go faster, the station already in his sight. The more he was hearing about the potential villain, the more fearful he was getting. If there is any risk of danger, abandon going to Mura's and hide. Keep the location feature on your phone open. I have an app that can disclose your location to me if it ever comes to that. I don't want to risk barging in now just in case the villain tries anything to harm the two of you while I'm unable to help. Keep your phone on you at all times and be safe, understand Izuku? He could feel the shock from the use of his first name even through the phone, but it apparently did the trick as the kid replied with a full, serious voice. I understand, sensei. If all goes well, expect me at the cafe in 20 minutes. If not, I'll text you. Alright. Go quietly and carefully. If there's a chance that you can't make it to the cafe, try to find a small space to hide in, or a way to a rooftop and I'll come find you. I'm going to. Cut the call now. Swallowing uncomfortably, Shoyuta clenched his jaw and agreed before a small sound indicated the end of the call. His brain was racing with case files and information regarding anything close to what Midoriya had described. A plague mask is hard to miss, considering its beak-like structure. However, no matter how hard he tried to remember, nothing about it rang familiar to him. God, he hopes the kid is going to be okay. Izuku was kind of freaking out right now. There was a small, scared girl clinging to his back as he tiptoed around the sides and corners of alleyways trying to avoid the attention of a supposed Yakuza member villain who was also probably torturing this girl, which is not okay, and now he's here because he's trying to be a hero who smiles in the face of danger, and he's really trying, but it's so hard when he's absolutely terrified right now. And focus, mental sensei says. The moment you lose your head, you're as good as useless. Okay, he whispers to himself. Okay. Everything's going to be okay. It's been about 5 minutes since the call with Aizawa-sensei and he's steadily getting closer to the cafe. As long as he kept up this game of zigzag and notice me not, with his plain face and the dark shadows, Izuku is hoping and praying that they'll be able to make it without getting caught. Just in case though, his phone is always in reach and opened to his sensei's dial screen. So even if he doesn't look, all he needs to do is open his phone and click the call button. It's going to be okay, he repeats again and again. Izuku-san. He pauses. Eri hasn't said one word to him since they started moving. He experiences a foreboding feeling overcome his body. Yeah, Eri? Still he smiles. He smiles bright and toothy, getting rid of some of the girl's anxiety. I think he's coming. I can feel it here, she says, pointing to her gut. Izuku almost has half a mind to laugh, but can't help but take her warning seriously. They were so close. Gritting his teeth, he dives behind a large dumpster and makes him and Eri as small as possible, taking Aizawa-sensei's advice. He holds Eri close to his chest as he draws his knees up as much as he can. Thank God he's more lean than bulky. Just as he made them comfortable, he hears the unmistakable sound of footsteps entering the alley. Izuku holds his breath and clutches Eri tighter. The child is trembling but absolutely quiet. Eri, time to go now. You don't want anything to happen to your new friend now, do you? He drawls out, loud footsteps getting closer and closer to the dumpster. Now that Izuku actually thought about it though, why were there no people through these alleyways? He would have thought that there would be a few odd folks scattered around the area, but it was quiet. Too quiet. Izuku held his breath as he spotted the man's shadow from under the dumpster. Sweat rolled down Izuku's head as he waited, his breath uneven but quiet, the panic looking over his shoulder. But not yet touching. He had to keep it together. He had to. What kind of hero would he be otherwise? His mind was in overdrive when he heard footsteps once again getting louder and approaching the dumpster, last-minute plans overlapping in his head as he thought of the worst-case scenarios. Was he really ready to fight a villain if it came down to it? Would he be able to save Eri? Suddenly, white overcame his vision as Eri buried her head further into his neck. He almost smiled as the tickle of her hair against his nose grounded him, clearing his mind and driving away his anxiety, if only for a moment. The severity of the situation returned, however, when he heard the villain's footsteps come to a stop. The tense atmosphere thickened and approached a crescendo when he spotted the shoes of their villain right behind their hiding spot, the object in between them being the only separator from disaster. His phone sat snugly in his back pocket. Izuku was sure that the deadline he appointed for himself was over. If only he could reach for his phone, if only. Bang. Widening his eyes, Izuku barely swallows a whimper, hands trembling. Eri was no better as he could feel a slowly growing wet spot on his neck. She was terrified. Her small body held too many scars, and her eyes too many fears. How could someone do this to her? What had driven her to this level of fear from a single man? Even though Izuku felt his own fear trying to make a home in his head, he took a big breath and willed his hands to stabilize and hold on to her solidly, trying to tell her that he was here. He wasn't going anywhere without her, no matter what happened. "Ah, this is really annoying. You brats really need to know your place," he said. An irritated sigh left his mouth as another bang resounded throughout the alley, the dumpster shifting from the direct impact. If it moved even a little more, him and Eri would be exposed. Just as Izuku thought of making a run for it, another blessedly familiar voice entered his ears. Izuku almost sobbed from the realization they were going to be okay. "Is there a problem here?" said the voice of One Aizawa Shoyuta, aka Underground Pro Hero Eraserhead, tense and particularly unforgiving at the mental image of his student in danger. A few more words were exchanged between the two before he heard the villain say something about losing his way and apologizing, his retreating footsteps causing an overwhelming amount of relief that extended to both children. After a few more tense moments of complete silence, Shoyuta couldn't help but call out, "Kid? Izuku?" A few seconds later, Izuku shakily got up and stumbled into the alleyway, clutching Eri almost desperately in his grasp. "Sensei." Shoyuta could only feel pure relief at the sight of his kid, terrified but okay, standing in front of him. Rushing to the teenager, the pro hero couldn't help but place a hand on his head to pull him to his chest. 2 seconds later, Shoyuta felt a hand come up to clutch his uniform while the other held on to the small child. Finally sated, he took a few deep breaths and pulled away from the almost hug in order to look at the white-haired child in his student's arms. "Eri," he had said. Both of them had a lot of explaining to do. "I'm home, Mom," Izuku yelled, placing his shoes by the door. Inko hurriedly rushed to the door, concern and worry in her eyes as she pulled her son into a hug. Relaxing into his mother's arms, Izuku finally let all of the stress and fear of the day bleed out of him. "Oh hell, is Izuku okay?" a voice exclaimed from down the hall. A sigh of relief came not long after. "Come here, you." When Inko got the call from your homeroom teach, she was nearly out of her mind with worry. Pulling out from his mother's embrace, he turned his head to meet eyes with his Aunt Mitsuki. He nearly forgot that today was Girls' Day. In a few short seconds, he was pulled into the embrace of his aunt before she painfully rubbed her knuckles into his head. "Ow, ow, ow. That's what you get, brat. The hell were you thinking, going off like that, huh? Couldn't you have waited to get in our area to get the DMN soy sauce?" Izuku looked pleadingly towards his mother, but the short woman just raised an eyebrow unsympathetically. "She's right, you know," she seemed to be saying. She managed to keep her facade up for 2 more seconds before the tears started rolling down her face. This in turn triggered Izuku's own tears, rushing to embrace his mother again and apologizing for worrying her until they were both sobbing messes. Mitsuki could only watch the two fondly before dragging them to the couch and putting on a soap opera. Later in the night, when Mitsuki left and Izuku was asleep in her arms on the couch, Inko placed a gentle kiss on his head. "I know that with this path, there's going to be a lot of danger that will be present in his life," she thought, glancing down at his peaceful face. "But please, Cammy, keep him safe until he's truly ready. Keep him happy and fulfilled before the time comes that I won't be able to protect him and hold him like this." With those thoughts in her head, Inko dozed off with her son on their old couch. The questions could come tomorrow. As long as he was safe, nothing else mattered. "I am going to be very frank with you, Midoriya-kun. What you did today was reckless and could have risked both Eri-chan and your safety," Nedza said, eyes steadily resting on the hunched figure of the student across from him. Aizawa lingered at the back of the room, the girl asleep in his arms. "According to my sources in the police force, the man you almost encountered is the leader of a yakuza called Shai Hasaikai, a group suspected to be engaging in suspicious business from behind the scenes. Although I cannot disclose the specifics of the investigation, it was enough to warrant the attention of All Might's former sidekick, Night Eye. There were too many things that could have gone wrong today. Not for Aizawa-kun coming at the right time, you might not even be here in front of me right now." Izuku clenched his jaw and kept his eyes on the floor as tears threatened to breach his poorly made defenses. He knew that what he did was foolish and reckless, But no matter how much he tried to regret it and feel sorry, he couldn't. Every time he remembered Eri's face, fearful and frowning and haunted, he could never bring himself to regret what he did to save her. To be quite honest, this is enough reason to suspend you, or even worse, get expelled. Izuku held his breath and squeezed his eyes closed, hands curled tightly into fists. Sighing, Netsu blinked at the tense aura radiating off of Midoriya before continuing. However, at the end of the day, you saved someone. And although it was reckless, you never engaged in unnecessary combat, called your teacher when you felt that this was something you couldn't handle on your own, remained mostly calm throughout the whole ordeal, and managed to save Eri from whatever she was afraid of. Snapping his head up in shock, Izuku could only look at the principal in bewilderment. Although you will still receive punishment for this, I cannot deny the good work you've done. Just don't make it a habit until you get your provisional license, understand? Izuku could only nod feverishly, a few tears leaking out from his eyes. Hi. Izuku could only wince at the reminder of his teacher almost 2 weeks ago, once again caught in the midst of a mugging. So much for being a normal day. Ever since he had rescued Eri from the Yakuza leader, it was like some kind of invisible barrier was broken that was hiding him from the magnetic attraction of trouble. It was like there was a bright, neon sign stuck to his forehead saying, "Looking for danger and expulsion," flashing in alternating colors. This was the 4th mugging he stumbled upon just this week alone, and Aizawa-sensei was steadily losing his mind. He could tell. He could tell because he was losing his mind too. "Please stop before I call the police," he says, sighing. 2 weeks ago, he would have been scared and lost on what to do in this type of situation. Now, he just wanted coffee. "Tsukachi is rubbing off on you," Mental Sensei says. He shrugs in response. The detective had good taste, and considering that the past 2 weeks have been nothing but making the police station his second home, he had to pick up something from him eventually. "If you know what's good for you, you won't do it, sonny," the mugger says, holding a knife to the woman's neck. His ugly mug was stretched into a hateful scowl. Izuku knows that he can't use a quirk to attack unless it's for self-defense. It's just his luck that he doesn't have one to use. Narrowing his eyes, he moves fast and hits a soft point on the mugger's right side, making the muscles in the arm holding the knife go limp. The woman takes this chance and frees herself from the man's weak hold on her. The man tries to do something with his eyes, probably his quirk, but Izuku is too fast and sweeps his legs from under him. Without a second to spare, Izuku knocks his elbow on his head and renders him unconscious. Thank you so much." The woman cries. It's okay. It was nothing really, the important thing is that you're safe. And I'm going to call the police now, okay?" He stammers out, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. Why was knocking out criminals easier than social interaction? Shaking his head, he scrolls through his contacts and dials the number with the name, Favorite Detective. The phone in his hand rings once, twice, thrice. Midoriya. Tsukachi-san. Brawl. No. Assault. No. Asai. Mugging. Ding ding ding, he says weakly. This is the 4th one this week. I know. Is the perp awake? Unconscious. Where? The mall district, alley behind the arcade. I just wanted ice cream and the quickest way there was through the back. I might as well employ you as an officer at this point. Yeah, and I can be your criminal magnet. Being a detective has never been so easy. A snort. I'm coming, kid. You know the drill. See you, Tsukachi-san. See you, Midoriya. There better be only one this time. Midoriya flashes back to last Sunday, when he called the detective for one perp, only for him to arrive with an extra 2 behind him. They bumped into him with knives and profanities. What else was he supposed to do? Hi. The phone call ends, and Izuku wonders what the F his life has become. When he arrives at school the next day, Aizawa-sensei greets him with a sigh. I was informed you bumped into a gang fight today, he deadpants. Who the F just bumps into a gang fight? A kid lost his kitten. I chased after it until I crashed into someone with guns for hands. They told me I was a part of the fight now. I just wanted the kitten. The 2 gangs made me choose sides. When I wouldn't, they attacked me. I just wanted the kitten. He says, green eyes staring into his soul. Midnight passes by the classroom, humming in sympathy. The infamous teacher-student duo both sigh in defeat. Wear your gym clothes. Yes, Sensei. Why are we here again, Mom? He asks, contemplating jumping out the window as an escape route. He's sure that if he times it right, he could slide it open and push through with little fanfare. It would raise alarm, of course, and the building was 3 stories high, but he's had worse. Honestly, he would find a way. Maybe he should ask Chi-chan for sticky gloves, or power loader, or... Because, she says, interrupting his wonderful and productive train of thought. We have to check for your quirk. Mom, I don't have a quirk. Tell that to all the people you put in jail and the gray hair I found today. Also, I see you looking at that window. Don't think I'm going to let you get out of this again. I still can't believe how you crawled through the vents last time, Izuku. Inko can only put her face in her hands. As she hears an echoing "oops, I slipped," steadily getting softer from the window. Midoriya, Izuku-kun? The poor doctor asks, opening the door. Inko wonders if it's still too early for a drink. Since the very unprofessional and lucky rescue, Eri has become a ward of Yui. According to the police officers in charge of the investigation, until they apprehended Chisaki and gathered enough evidence to be granted a warrant, leading to the takedown of the organization, Eri wouldn't be safe in the foster system. Not to mention that the 5-year-old girl apparently had no control over her quirk. The bigger problem revealed itself in the fact that no one knew exactly what her quirk was. It was obvious enough that it had something to do with the horn on her head, but no one has been able to coax any information out of Eri about the mysteries clouding her powers. The general quirk registrations also proved fruitless in providing any insight because it was sorely vague and untelling of her full power. The only time they were given even a lick of an idea to Eri's quirk was during one of Izuku's tri-weekly visits. After the decision to have Eri as a ward of Yui, Cementos wasted no time in creating a small, dorm-like area in Yui for the girl to reside in. Nannies were hired in order to take care of her needs, and Recovery Girl came in to visit Eri often in order to kickstart Eri's healing process. It was after his classes that Izuku visited the white-haired girl, excited to meet and check up on her well-being. The visit went as it always did, with Izuku doing most of the talking while Eri listened and on rare occasions, contributed to the conversation. The girl wore some cute, unicorn-themed clothing that day, and although she was still unable to smile, her eyes sparkled as she listened to her hero ramble about his classes and his mother's cooking. The conversation only took a turn when Izuku started delving into his quirk analysis on a recent rookie hero. The freckled teen immediately knew something was wrong when the light in the girl's eyes dimmed for a few seconds after he mentioned their amazing quirk. "Eri-chan, are you okay?" he had asked, concerned. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder in reassurance. The lower lip of the young girl slightly trembled in response, and she curled into herself by burrowing her body deeply into the soft cushions of the couch. Izuku startled and furrowed his eyebrows in confusion and worry. "Eri-chan," he said softly. "My quirk." She whispered, not meeting her hero's eyes, as if she were ashamed. As if she were repulsed by something that was a part of her very being. "My quirk is cursed." And nothing more was ever said after that. Izuku remembered leaving for the train station that day with a heavy heart and the prickling feel of tears behind his eyes. Raining. Sighing, Izuku reaches down to pack up his things and get ready to go home. He thinks he's had enough of midnight trying to explain abstract art. Honestly, the woman was just a bucketful of innuendos. He was just a little impressed and embarrassed. "Oh ha, Midoriya-kun, please don't faint on me, ha. Oh god, it's so fun to tease you, kid ha. Okay, maybe very embarrassed. You're a tomato, ha." The blush burns from the tips of his ears to his chest, and can you really blame him? Can you? And this hard edge most likely represented his desire for the love of his life, who he quite enthusiastically talked about in his journals. Truly, whenever they were together, that hard edge was present in his thoughts. I'm sure he made his love very, very happy, especially in their own home, where he had that hard edge present the most in his paintings. Kami, Izuku could really use some air right now, away from his R-rated teacher who made it her life mission to tease him till he was dead or something. Heh? Mental Sensei chuckles. Izuku glares at him in his head, and then feels like kicking himself because he's laughing and glaring at himself. Maybe mom can take me to a therapist instead of a quirk doctor this week, he thinks and shakes his head. Today is not the day you will crumble, Izuku. Not today. Just as he finished packing up, Aizawa-sensei suddenly entered the room, startling both Kiyama-sensei and himself. Aizawa-sensei? Shoyuta? Blinking tiredly, the underground hero whispers something to the woman which brings an understanding look in her eyes. Flashing a thumbs up to her student, she exits the classroom and calls out "See you tomorrow, bunny," as she walks down the hall. Izuku feels himself start to blush again. Bunny? Aizawa-sensei asked, an eyebrow raised in inquiry. Don't, please, he almost begs, looking like a freshly picked strawberry. Aizawa-sensei stares at him for a solid 5 seconds more before sighing his "I'm too tired for this shit" sigh and sits down on his chair. Before you leave, I just wanted to discuss the provisional license exam with you. He started. Usually, we would wait until your second year to get you tested for your license, but with your recent circumstances. Izuku winces. The UE staff has decided to let the first years try out for the exam. We were anticipating this to happen eventually, though we didn't expect to have to do it for at least another 3 years. That being said, the exam will take place in around 2 weeks' time. During those 2 weeks I'm going to be amping up our training sessions. Izuku felt his soul momentarily leave his body at the thought, but quickly grounded himself with a pinch to his skin. This is why he came to UE, to get stronger, strong enough to become a hero even without a quirk. The first tangible step to reaching those dreams was his provisional license, and hell if he wasn't going to get it because he was underprepared. Look at useless Deku, he can't even protect his younger brother. Izuku sobbed as the wounds on his body burned and ached. Katsuki stood behind him, growling at the bullies. There was something different in his eyes though, something that was never there before when he looked at his "the." Perhaps this was the start, because Izuku was never prepared, never ready, never enough. Stealing his resolve, he looked his sensei in the eye and smiled with teeth. Bring it on, sensei. I see, Nizu says over the phone, holding his cup of warm tea. The weather was exceptionally great today. On the other line, All Might sighs. Day by day I am getting weaker. I believe it is finally time for me to accept your offer to teach at UE and look for a successor. Next year, I will be ready, he says. If I may, All Might, I believe there is someone you might like to see as a possible candidate. He is a student of mine, actually. By the time you arrive, he will be in his second year. Netsu calmly states, taking a sip of his chamomile tea. Thank you for the offer, Principal. Truly. But I would like to hand-pick my successor myself as much as possible. Night Eye has already been pushing for me to consider a student he took in for internships, and I'm afraid that if I cannot find a worthy successor myself, I will have to listen to his suggestions. That is quite all right. I only suggested him because he was the first one who came to mind, though to be honest, I think he would have said no if you offered your power to him regardless. Netsu smiles. He's already on the way to becoming quite the hero. Izuku. Looking up from his homework, he turns to his mother standing at his doorway. Yeah, Mom? Have you seen your other school tie? I could have sworn we bought you 3 pairs during the start of the school year, she says, frowning in thought. I don't think so. Let me check my room real quick, he says, abandoning his desk. After the underground hero left, Chisaki Kai walks back and pushes the dumpster away with irritation. He almost had them, he could practically feel how close he was. He almost had them. Growling, he shoves the dumpster again, revealing a brief flash of red on the floor. Pausing, he bends down and picks up a red fabric with his gloved hands, examining what looked to be a poorly knotted tie. A school tie, with a small tag at the back branding the fabric with the logo of UA. Crushing the tie in his fist, a crazed, yet calm gleam settled in his eyes. Eri was his, and if he got to dispose of the brat who got in his way in the process, even better. As Izuku walks to school the next day, his feet unconsciously take him to a route he hasn't walked on for a while now. As he continues his walk, he passes by the park he used to play in when he was younger and smiles at the silence coating the grounds at the early hour. If he closed his eyes, he could almost hear the laughter and delighted screams that covered the playground so long ago. Breathing in the cold air, he continues his trek to the station. Perhaps it was because of the weather, or his daydream-like state, but Izuku didn't realize there was someone in front of him until he was right there. Situational awareness, problem child, mental sensei says. Izuku was about to apologize when he caught a flash of ash blonde hair and ruby red eyes. Bumping shoulders, the two don't look back and continue on their way without saying a single word. Perhaps one day, they would apologize and restore what they had before it went so wrong. Izuku walks on, ignoring the sudden pin-prick pain in his heart. Unbeknownst to him, Katsuki Bakugo does the same. The first thing you need if you want to make it as a quirkless hero is resilience. Aizawa-sensei says, hands in the pockets of his black jumpsuit. Izuku stands across from him, standing on the field that he was quickly going to be acquainted with in the near future. Naive, unassuming, and blissfully unaware of the struggle he was about to face. Without the will, you won't make it in the hero world for less than a day, let alone make it out of Yui. The wind ruffles through Izuku's curly head of green hair as his teacher calmly looks at him. He takes a silent breath. The second thing you need is intelligence. Sensei continues. Especially under your current predicament, you need to make up for the lack of quirk with something that some brute heroes don't really use today. Logic. Smarts. Analysis. The ability to notice the small details and exploit them without thinking twice. Izuku nods his head in silent understanding. Given his disadvantage, he knew from the beginning that he was going to work in the shadows as an underground hero. With that in mind, he can't afford to hesitate or falter when faced with an opportunity that could appear as less than savory. He needed to improve his ability to spot weaknesses, and his resolve to use that against someone. Lastly, you need to be unpredictable. Sensei says, breaking Izuku out of his train of thought. I understand you have some prior knowledge on fighting, which is good. However, sticking to one style your whole life can make you very predictable and open to those who have experienced the way you fight before. I'm not saying to discard whatever you learned, because DSPLN and awareness is definitely needed here. What I'm saying is to make your own style of fighting, which can have a mixture of multiple disciplines, katas, and forms. Now, with all of that out of the way, Izuku can't help but feel nervous as Aizawa-sensei smiles at him with teeth, looking more like a predator assessing his prey. We can get to putting it into practice. As Izuku lays in bed, 3 days before his provisional license exam, that specific session with Aizawa-sensei plays on a loop over and over in his head. Resilience. Smarts. Unpredictability. It played again and again and again until it was properly ingrained into his very being. As he cycled the lesson in his mind, however, he couldn't help but feel like something important was missing. Something else that would complete the little mantra. Playing in his head. Resilience. Smarts. Unpredictability. A shiver suddenly racks his body as the cold night air makes it through his window. Getting up from his bed, he tiredly makes his way to the flowing curtains and locks the window shut until silence blankets his room. Resilience. Smarts. Unpredictability. Sighing, Izuku rubs his eyes and ignores the clock in his room that pointed to it being 2:25 a.m. It was just one of those days. He would go to sleep eventually. Or not. Resilience. Smarts. Unpredictability. Stretching his arms behind his back, Izuku accidentally bumps into one of the shelves holding one of his many collector item action figures. Wincing at the sound it made as it hit the floor with a thump, he leans down to pick it up. It was his All Might action figure. Izuku stares at the smile of one of his favorite heroes, thinks about his mother's eyes, and then Ares' haunted face. He thinks about him. And then he thinks about himself. He knows now what was missing. Resilience. Smarts. Unpredictability. The next day, Izuku can't help but to go visit Eri, even though it wasn't his usual visiting hours. For some reason he just felt compelled to go visit her today. When Eri eventually spots the curly green head of her hero, her eyes immediately brighten and sparkle. Midori, she whispers from the couch, still unable to smile. The nickname caught on as Eri literally identified Izuku with the color green, not to mention the word being integrated in his last name. It became so much of a thing that even some of his teachers took to calling him Midori, or as Yamada-sensei liked to call him, Green Bean. He still doesn't know what that's supposed to say about him, and whenever he asks someone, they give him an amused but pitiful smile that for some reason he thinks is telling him, "Oh, you poor, oblivious child." As you can probably tell, he's thought about this a lot. Nedza-sensei is still chuckling into his tea about it, he swears. Waving away his straying thoughts, he approaches the little girl and offers her a bright smile. "Hey, Eri-chan, how have you been?" he says, sitting by her on the couch. The small TV in the room was currently playing an anime that was about some kind of host club with a cross-dressing protagonist. Izuku was going to ignore that. "Thank you very much." "I'm okay," she replies softly. "Nana nurse gave me gummy bears," she adds on after a moment, reaching into her pocket and bringing out a Ziploc bag with the colorful treats. She shows it to Izuku with expressive eyes, as if she was looking for his approval or praise. "That's great," Izuku says cheerfully. "My day probably wasn't as eventful as yours, I'm sure." With that, Izuku goes on his usual rambling spree with Eri attentively listening. The freckled boy was probably rambling for much longer than he thought though, because after a while a gentle weight settled against his shoulder. Twitching in shock, he abruptly cuts himself off to look over to his side, finding Eri adorably sleeping whilst leaning against his arm. "Ah, geez," he mumbles, unable to keep his lips from curling into a fond smile at the girl's quiet snores. After a few minutes of staying still in order to not wake the girl, who do you think he is, a monster? He was interrupted in his internal debate on how long he was going to have to sit before A, dying of boredom or restlessness, B, falling asleep, or C, Aizawa-sensei sending a police search party that will most definitely include Tsukachi-san and even more terrifyingly his mother, before the door to the small dorm room opened. Izuku was shocked to find Hound Dog, the school's counselor, and Tsukachi-san. What if Sensei actually sent a search party? Oh god, he was so dead at the front door. Hound Dog Sensei. Tsukachi-san. He squeaked out, blushing when their eyes settled on the young girl using the greenette as a convenient pillow. I can explain?" he said, sheepishly rubbing the back of his neck. Holding the bridge of his nose between two fingers, Tsukachi sighed deeply. Deciding to ignore the sudden awkward tension in the room, Hound Dog huffs and sits on the couch opposite to Izuku, crossing his arms. Tsukachi followed after him and sat next to the intimidating hero. "Well," Tsukachi drawled out after a few seconds, "at least I know where Aizawa's problem child is now." Izuku laughs awkwardly in response, and the detective decides to ignore the fact that he should have been out of school an hour ago. Shaking his head, he sighs and makes a decision. "We were here to supposedly talk to Eri about her quirk, but since you're here you might as well know. I'm aware that Eri holds you in high regard, so you might be able to help her through this." Furrowing his eyebrows in confusion, he nods to let the officer know he was listening. Eri's quirk, as you know, has been a huge mystery to everyone involved except for the suspected Yakuza group that had her. He starts, face carefully kept neutral. "In order to find anything that may help us find out more about her quirk, aside from the incredibly vague quirk registry documents that said, 'rewind,' and nothing else except the detail of the growth of her horn relating to her power, we had to use other means to gather anything we can to gauge if her quirk would be potentially dangerous or not." Izuku suddenly remembers that day a few days ago, when Eri confessed to believing her quirk was cursed, and frowned. "If it's any help, it doesn't seem like Eri-chan likes her quirk very much," he says, sadly. "That might imply that the Yakuza used her quirk in some way that made her believe that, so I think it might be a powerful quirk since they would resort to scarring a 6-year-old for whatever reason they had just to use it," he said almost angrily, catching his lower lip in order to calm down. "Yeah. That's what we were generally assuming as well," he says, softening his features. "Anyways, I was going to speak to Eri. With the help of Hound Dog since Eri's warmed up to him, but I think this will go a lot smoother with you here. You up for it, Midoriya-kun?" Looking back at Tsukachi-san with determined and almost protective eyes, he nods and smiles. "Of course," he says as he regrettably proceeds to wake up Eri from her peaceful slumber. Walking home, Izuku can't help but think that Eri's starting to cry in the middle of a question regarding her quirk, burying her face in his chest, and staying completely silent wasn't exactly what Tsukachi-san hoped for. Before finally postponing the questioning, he remembers the officer's words before he left, Hound Dog comforting the crying girl on the couch who was apologizing again and again for something they didn't understand or know about. "I'm really sorry about this. I guess I didn't realize just how uncomfortable she was to talk about her own quirk," he had said, sighing tiredly. "I understand if this is a bit much, but Midoriya, if you can help her open up a bit more about her situation, that would be immensely helpful in ensuring her safety and furthering the investigation." "Of course, Tsukachi-san," he had said, taking a moment to look back at the sniffling girl on the couch. "I just really want her to be okay," he added, whispering sadly. At that, the detective put a steadying hand on his shoulder and shot him a reassuring smile. "That's what we're all working towards, Midoriya. All you need to do to help us achieve that is by being yourself and making Eri feel safe and happy." Sighing, he continues on his way home, thoughts of the white-haired girl lingering in his mind. "Izuku honey, we have to leave. The train won't wait for us." Inko calls from the living room, bustling around to make sure their things were all in order. The short woman just recently got a job in another district, and her client was generous enough to provide her a living space for the weekend with the only payment being to do her job to the best of her ability. Thankfully, the place she was provided had enough room for Izuku to stay in, which is why she was bringing her son with her. For once, she was grateful that she was a highly sought-out lawyer. "Coming, Mom," Izuku hollered from his room, stuffing as many notebooks as he could into his backpack. The provisional license exam was on Monday, so sue him for being extra paranoid. He was going to have to go to Yui for his Friday classes anyways, so no, he was definitely not overpacking. By the time Inko locked up their apartment and got on the train, it was already dawn. As Friday rolled around, it took no less than 20 minutes after coming back from school, which was a record by the way, to be shoved out of the house by his sweet and loving mother to go do something else, while she outlined her battle plan to absolutely decimate the poor sod going against her. Seems like the living accommodations provided to her by her client fired her up. Izuku could understand, considering. There was a hot tub in there, and there's really no other way to say it, luxury apartment. He still couldn't get the image of his mother almost falling into the hot tub in shock out of his mind, mostly because he did that too, when he found out there was a FING outdoor swimming pool on the roof. His mother was well off, and they lived comfortably, but goddamn. Shaking his head, Izuku decides to use this time being banished from their probably overpriced temporary apartment by going on a light jog. Placing his earbuds into his ears, Izuku played an upbeat song and took note of the street he was in before making his way down the road, enjoying the cool breeze on his skin. As he made his way further down, he realized he was nearby some kind of middle school, as evident by the many students chatting and walking down the sidewalk. He smiled a bit at the teens laughing and joking around with their friends, before getting back on track and turning a corner. What happened next would make Tsukachi-san ground him probably for forever if he had a say in it. A huge, towering figure over two middle school girls, asking for directions to a specific place. A boy with black hair rushing in to help but suddenly stopping in fear. A pink-skinned girl sliding in to give the obviously shady-looking man some directions as she trembled in her shoes. Izuku's instincts going haywire and responding to danger like it ran in his blood. He ripped off his earbuds, tapped the man on his back, and made him turn so that the three girls behind him could safely make their way out. With that out of the way, he smiled innocently at the man towering over his small figure and confidently led the conversation even as his heart was beating hard and fast in fear. "I heard you needed directions, sir. I couldn't help but listen in, and I know exactly where you need to go." Pulling out his phone, he secretly turned on his microphone and opened up Google Maps as he made up some bullshit about the shortcuts to get to the address he restated to him. Following in the pink-skinned girl's lead, he simply gave him directions to the nearest police station and let him go, eyeing his back in suspicion. Turning off the recording, he immediately sent the voice message to Tsukachi-san, hoping the police officer could convince some heroes in the district to check out the address the shady man gave him just in case. Letting out a breath he didn't know he was holding, he turned to the three girls he saw earlier, all of which were trembling and holding on to each other on the floor. Jogging up to them, he crouched down to their level and looked at them with concerned eyes. "Are you guys okay?" he asked. "Thank you, Hick, so much." The brunette sobbed out, "Tea to both of you. Mina-chan, you were so brave," she exclaimed. The other girl beside her nodded her head furiously in agreement. The pink-skinned girl, who he assumed was Mina, just shook her head and gave her friends a wobbly smile. "No need to thank me. Isn't that what heroes are supposed to do?" She laughed, and even though it sounded shaky, the tension in the air suddenly cleared as the other civilians and middle schoolers surrounding them broke out into laughs of their own and praises for the Mina girl. "Thank you too. Oh." Izuku smiled sheepishly. "Midoriya Izuku. What you did was really brave, Mina-chan. You did good. Right back at ya. I really thought he was gonna see through me. It was all thanks to you that he finally left," she exclaimed. Smiling, he took her thanks, checked on the three girls again to make sure they weren't hurt, and bid them goodbye before continuing on his jog. As he turned, he failed to notice the defeated expression on a black-haired boy's face standing just a few meters away from them. After the incident on Friday, which he was exasperatedly scolded for by both his mother and Aizawa-sensei, seriously, at this point you would think sensei was acting like a fath. Nope, no, we are not going there. Saturday went by peacefully and with no further surprises. As Sunday came, Izuku was woefully counting down the seconds until they had to leave their gem of an apartment and return back home for his provisional license exam. Sighing dejectedly, he leaves the apartment an hour before dawn and goes on his daily jog, opting not to listen to his mother's client singing praises about her as if they were honestly preparing to propose. Yeah, no thanks, his mom could handle that problem. As he continues his peaceful jog, his feet take him by the same middle school he saw just 2 days ago, only to find a black-haired boy sitting on a bench nearby the grounds. His eyes squint a bit and suddenly he remembers a boy looking exactly like him freezing in fear whilst Mina tried to misdirect the villain. Frowning, he gradually slows down his pace until he's only a few meters away from the bench. The boy clearly hasn't noticed him yet. His inky black hair hung in front of his face as he slouched over and looked at the ground, his fists looking painfully clenched on top of his knees. Sighing, Izuku walks towards the boy and quietly sits on the opposite end of the bench. Dimmin his bleeding heart, but Izuku was not going to turn away if he had the power to stay. The moment he sat down, the student startled and looked as if he suddenly just realized where he was. Looking to his left, he found Izuku sitting at the opposite end, giving him a friendly smile. Hey! The freckled boy started, and then felt like pushing his face underground for. Real eloquent Izuku, 10 out of 10. I mean. Izuku sighs, sorry, I just had the feeling you needed someone to talk to, but if you don't want to then I can just leave. You just looked really stressed out about something and I know you don't know me but if something's bothering you this much I really think you should talk to Somio Niandai to isn't that obema but. Whoa dude, relax. The boy said raising both palms, facing outwards as if to placate him. Although his eyes were wide in confusion and shock, his face was no longer holding an expression of self-loathing, a face that Izuku was more than familiar with, which was a win in his book. Sorry. You really seemed like something was troubling you, and I couldn't help but want to hear you out, he finally ends up saying, putting on an awkward smile. God, he hoped social interaction was a course in Yui. He needed it, desperately. It was quiet for a few more seconds before the boy next to him put down his hands and slumped his shoulders, looking defeated. I want to be a hero, he says, first and foremost. His scarlet eyes held a determined gaze even as his voice slightly shook and his vision once again pointed downwards to the floor. That's really admirable, he says softly. The boy looks up for a second to shoot him a small smile. Thanks, he replies. He looks back to the ground. I want to be a hero like Crimson Riot. I want people to look at me and think I'm dependable. Some people tease me for it sometimes, but I want to be manly just like him. Even though my quirk isn't really all that flashy, I do my best to stop bullies and stuff from doing bad things in school, he continues, fiddling with his fingers. He pauses to reach up and tuck some of his shoulder-length black hair behind his ear, and Izuku is met with the face of a dejected boy. His heart goes out to him, especially because he's seen that face stare back at him more than once in his own bathroom mirror. I don't see what's wrong with that. Crimson Riot is a really awesome hero. He's really chivalrous and isn't afraid to speak his mind and talk about his own feelings. Even though he's a bit of an older hero, I've always admired him for his strength. Plus, it seems like you're already on your way to becoming a hero. Protecting those who can't protect themselves is one of the main requirements of being a hero, and it looks like you've got that down pat, Izuku rambles, hoping to comfort the boy. Looking mildly surprised, the Ravenet opens and closes his mouth a few times before giving Izuku a genuine smile, a little bit of fire that wasn't present before suddenly flickering in his red eyes. Why, Crimson Riot is super manly. I've always admired him as a kid, and I told everyone from a young age that I'd be just like him. He excitedly responds. His words suddenly get stuck as he finishes, however, making Izuku frown. But I'm never going to be as manly as him. When the time came that I had to act, I just froze, he says, frustrated. When it really mattered, my feet stayed stuck to the floor while my classmates had a chance to be seriously injured. I mean, out of everyone, I would be the least likely to get hurt because of my hardening quirk, but I couldn't move. He suddenly shouts, eyes suspiciously wet. I just stood there like an idiot while Mina slid in and tried to get him to go away. All those times I said I was going to be a hero, and the one time it really mattered, I didn't do anything. Forget being a hero, I'm not even a man. He sobs out, his arms going around to hold himself from breaking into pieces in front of a complete stranger. And then, another guy entered and finally got that guy to go away. I didn't even see who they were because I couldn't believe myself. How can I be a hero when I can't even save the people in front of me? He finishes, chin wobbling as he desperately tries to hold back his tears. The birds chirped overhead as the sun slowly started to set. The skies were filled with an assortment of pink, oranges, and blues when Kirishima Aijuru was gently hit on the head by the stranger beside him. Bak, Izuku says, smiling sadly. You want to know something, Stranger-kun? He asks, face steadily locked on the wet-eyed face of bewilderment beside him. I'm currently a first year at UE, and when I was faced with my first potential villain, I was so terrified that all I could do was call my teacher and try to hide. He says, chuckling dryly. The only thing that kept me from completely losing to the fear was the fact that there was a little girl in my arms I was trying to save. I didn't fight, or did anything flashy to be heroic at all. I was just scared and frankly a little helpless, Izuku continues. If my teacher didn't come in time, things probably would have gotten really messy really quick, but thankfully both me and her are okay. Still teary-eyed, Aijuru opens his mouth. Why are you telling me this? Is because, he says, being afraid doesn't automatically make you unheroic, you know? The best heroes out there are usually always afraid when faced with a dangerous situation. Trust me, I would know. I'm in a school filled to the brim with pro-heroes, he says, smiling. Aijuru can't help but to give a soundless chuckle. What matters most, even though it's cheesy, is this, Izuku says, fist bumping Aijuru's chest gently, right over his heart. It was hard for me to learn this too, but my teacher once told me that being afraid is good. That experiencing fear means that we're human. He says gently, ignoring his own beating heart as the teen in front of him absorbed every word coming from his mouth. Being afraid is good, because it gives you more reason to erase the fear from everyone else around you. Fear is good, because it's what can drive you to strive to be better, he continues, his sensei's words echoing in his mind. You know, Crimson Riot himself once said in an interview that what mattered most was the state of one's heart. For him, being chivalrous was living a life without any regrets. Pulling his hand away, Izuku smiles. Are you going to let this stop you from becoming the hero you weren't able to be during that moment? Eyes widening, Aijuru's breath stopped short as the words registered in his mind. His eyes were suddenly once again filled with tears, something that he didn't realize was dead suddenly stirring back to life inside of him. No, he sobbed. Aijuru couldn't help but latch on to the warm body suddenly embracing him as he sobbed his heart out, letting all the fear, anger, and disappointment locked inside him since 2 days ago out. When he finally calmed down, he hastily pulled back and rubbed his eyes harshly. "I'm so sorry, dude, I don't know what came over me. Ah man, I totally ruined your shirt, didn't I?" So. "It's fine." Izuku interrupts, laughing. "I'm honestly just glad you're feeling better now, or at least I hope you are," he says, raising an eyebrow jokingly. Aijiro laughs, and he feels free when his chest doesn't constrict in guilt. The two boys end up talking all the way until the sun finally sets and the older teen's phone starts to buzz in his pocket, his mother reminding him that they were due to leave for the station in an hour. Just as Izuku was getting ready to leave, Aijiro stops him. "Wait!" he exclaims. "Ag, I totally forgot to ask for your name, that's super unmanly." He groans. Izuku flushes when he realizes he didn't ask for the stranger's name either. "Oh my god," he says, and suddenly they're both laughing at their stupidity. Smiling, the freckled boy put his hand out. "My name is Midoriya Izuku. Thank you for letting me help you," he says. Aijiro reaches his own hand out to clasp the elder's hand firmly. "Kirishima Aijiro, and I swear that I will become a hero. I'll see you soon enough, senpai." For one, Izuku is really happy that Kirishima-kun feels a whole lot better. On the other hand, he was 0% prepared to be called senpai, resulting in him combusting in front of the younger on the spot. This is a pretty sad death, honestly. He would have the worst tombstone heading in the world, death by being called senpai. It's sad, it's really sad. Senpai? It was almost 10:30 p.m. when they got back home to their modest apartment, which he admittedly missed a lot, that Izuku heard the telltale notification sound of a text message on his phone. Pulling out the device, he smiled at the message staring at him and walked inside his home, getting ready for bed. He had a crucial exam tomorrow after all. Kirishima-kun. 10:32 p.m. Good luck for your test tomorrow, senpai. And thank you for today, I'll be cheering you on. Laughing face. Izuku fell asleep with a smile, relaxed and ready for tomorrow. When Izuku wakes up the next morning, the birds are chirping happily in the distance, the sun is shining warmly to create the perfect weather, and his bedroom is near silent because he woke up before his alarm. Getting up groggily, he blinks once, takes a deep breath, squints at the calendar on his wall with his mouth slightly open, blinks again, and promptly buries his face into his pillow to let out a god-awful scream. The birds fly away, a thunk is heard from the adjacent bedroom, and suddenly his alarm goes off playing the All Might theme song. I'm here to save the day. Doing it the All Might way. Evil will not escape my sight, all these villains will quiver in fright. Join me on my K. His door is then ripped open by a heaving Midoriya Inko, stray hairs curling around her face and a very threatening rolling pin in her hand. "Izuku, where are they? No one touches my baby." She shrieks, still half asleep and swatting the rolling pin around like a woman aiming to break a skull or two. "Mom!" Izuku wails, flailing his own arms with wet eyes. "License. Pro-V dash. Hero card. License. Today." Somewhere else in the city, Shoyuta feels a migraine start to descend upon him. On his way to the classroom, Izuku is given pats on the back by his 1B friends who were going to take their provisional license exams in another testing facility. He really doesn't understand why he's being separated from them again, but either way, today is the day he's going to prove his conviction to be a hero. To his teachers, to Eri, to his mother, and most importantly, to himself. Filled with a surge of confidence, Izuku tightens his hold on the straps of his backpack, straightens his back, marches to the door of his classroom, and promptly trips over thin air. It was fun while it lasted, he thinks as he prepares to faceplant on the ground. His downward descent into pain and embarrassment suddenly halted when he felt a tug on his backpack. "It's the start of the day," Aizawa-sensei says tiredly, pulling him up to stand straight. "We're not even in the classroom yet, problem child." "Good morning to you too, sensei," he says cheerfully, ignoring everything that happened 30 seconds prior. Sensei stares at him for a solid 15 seconds more before he raises a hand and drags it down his face. "Just go inside, Midoriya." "Yes, sensei." Since Izuku was the only one of his class, The principal took the initiative to forego a bus and instead had a Yui-approved vehicle take both him and Aizawa-sensei to the testing facility. Izuku was a mess of nerves the whole ride there, nervously clutching onto the suitcase with his costume inside. The only thought that was looping through his brain during those moments was that he couldn't fail now, not now when he's come this far with such an impossible dream. Employing some breathing techniques to try and calm himself down, Shoyuta notices the kid and lets out a small sigh. Raising his hand, he gently places it on top of the mess of curly green hair and lets it stay there until Izuku is blinking in confusion at the gentle weight on his head. "Sensei?" he asks, the heavy feeling in his chest momentarily disappearing. "Midoriya, I don't waste time on students who I don't think can succeed," he says matter-of-factly, retracting his hand. Smirking, he faces the front of the small car they were in and settled comfortably against the leather seats. "At this point, I'm more worried about how you're going to get to that point of success. Maybe try not to discover a criminal in the midst of the test? Or fracture a bone in the process? Or do some heart attack-inducing stunts?" Gaping, an embarrassed flush rose up until a gentle dusting of red was visible on his cheeks. It's not like I do it on purpose." The rest of the ride went by with Izuku feeling oddly reassured, even as their driver let out a few amused chuckles. With the absence of both Cementos and Aizawa, arguably the two most straightforward and intolerant to gossip of all the educators, the teacher's lounge was an interesting place to be in. Once Hisashi finally made it into the lounge as the last of the teachers to arrive. "You're late, Mike." Michimiya-kun accidentally got himself stuck to the ceiling. "What else was I supposed to do?" The slumber party askew girl talk started. Lunch break was 40 minutes long. The eccentric pro-hero teachers of the esteemed Yui Academy could do a lot in 40 minutes. So, midnight started, letting the letters roll off her tongue in an almost mischievous manner. "What are our bets?" Power Loader came forward first, betting 2 days' worth of paperwork whenever they needed it. "I bet that Midoriya will come back with a provisional license and a ruined costume that I will have to redo. Again. That's way too easy for our green bean. He almost always comes back with a ruined costume during this type of stuff," Hisashi exclaims. The rest of the teachers agree. "I also bet," he continues, a dangerous twinkle in his eyes, "that he will come back with at least 5 new cell phone numbers from other hero students." The lounge is stunned until they come back to themselves, laughing and smirking. "My turn," says Vlad King, equipped with a Dming bet of his own. Nedzu watches this all through his cameras, cackling in delight and amusement. Somewhere else in another district, Aijuru scrolls through his phone and suddenly jumps up in shock, stubbing his toe on the corner of his bed frame in the process. "Yow. Wait, what the heck? Midoriya's that quirkless second placer? That's so manly," he cries while jumping on one foot, pained tears in his eyes. "Eiji, stop yelling." "Midoriya." "Yes, sensei?" "You've got this. Remember the first homework I gave you? To stop doubting myself." "Michim. I'm asking for the return right now. Go do your thing." Izuku smiles. "Yes, sensei." Izuku breathes in, then out. He's got this. He hasn't been training for so long, and so hard for nothing. This is his moment of truth. This is the first major checkpoint of his race. There is no more going back. Shaking his limbs to loosen them up a bit, he glances around to see the many faces of other aspiring hero students around him. Most of them were second years while others were third years. It's a little obvious that Izuku's one of the only first years in the building. Taking in another deep breath, he focuses and recalls the instructions given to them by the tired is probably the best way to put it, man just a few moments prior. Really need some coffee. Anyways, the first stage of the exam is pretty cut and dry. It's pretty much like an altered game of cops and robbers, except you're all superpowered children fighting for a license. Ahem, in the simplest terms, students will be randomly picked to be cops or robbers. The cops can be identified through a blue armband, while the robbers are identified through red armbands. There's a jail area in the center of the arena where the caught robbers are placed, and there's a safe house at the edge of the arena for kidnapped or incapacitated cops. Both sides will be given 2 plastic balls with a receptor attached on their chests. If you are hit on that area, you will be carted to your respective prisons. However, you get 1 chance to be saved by someone from your team, which means if you get caught twice, you're out. The man yawns once before sighing. Just as we have done every year, only 50% of you will be passing. Considering that there are 521 students present right now, that means only 760 students will be going home with a license today. You will be given 5 minutes to discuss with your groups, and 15 minutes to complete this stage. Good luck. That was a few minutes ago, and now here he was with his fellow robbers, a red armband around his bicep. Alright, let's do this guys, robbers unite. An enthusiastic yell came from one side of the room. From what he gathered, it looked like a Ketsubutsu student. The boy had his blue hair up in a high ponytail on top of his head, his fist raised enthusiastically in the air. Ugh, I already hate this, a mutter came from nearby. Looking to his right, he sees a tall girl with short, shaggy auburn hair in 2 pigtails at the base of her neck. Although she was in her hero costume, he thought that he spotted her by the Seijin High students during orientation. He could tell because of some of their oddly ninja-like costumes. She was currently wearing loose pants tucked into dark boots, along with a black long-sleeved cropped shirt with bits of white, and what looked to be 2 long metal bracelets on her wrists. Done staring, short stack? Ah. He jumps, finding the girl's piercing, almost feline-like magenta eyes looking at him. Raising his hands, he waves it in front of his face. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable or anything. It's just that you said something and The girl keeps up a cool facade for a few more seconds before she snickers and smirks. Chill dude, I was just kidding around with ya. Izuku flushes. Rolling her eyes, the girl raises an eyebrow. So, what school are you from, Greenie? Greenie? He thinks before banishing the thought for later. Ah. I'm from B, he says nervously. He can only hope that she hasn't seen the sports festival. From her shocked expression, he can now confirm he has sheet luck. No way. You're that crazy quirkless kid who crawled his way up to 2nd place in the sports festival. Whisper shouts, a little amazed. I usually hate flamboyant assholes, but when I saw you on TV, I couldn't help but to join everyone else and root for you. She admits, crossing her arms in front of her chest. Oh, thanks I guess? He says, rubbing the back of his neck, keenly aware of her calculating gaze. Say, do you want to partner up? It'll be better if you have someone to watch your back. To be honest, you kinda inspired me a small bit. My quirks is pretty basic, but seeing you accomplish what you did with what you had was pretty damn amazing, she says, her gaze softening a little bit. It really? I was just doing my best. Anyone could have done what I did with enough training and… Oh Cammy, you're one of those people, she says, sighing. Her smile still stays firmly in place though, so Izuku tries not to worry about her ominous statement. No matter, just means I gotta beat it into you that you're pretty cool. Anyways, as much as I'm enjoying this conversation, Mr. Quirkless wonder, do you wanna team up or not? Blinking a few times just to make sure he wasn't hallucinating, the Granette finally huffs and smiles nervously back. I'd love to. What's your name again? The girl smirks toothily, revealing sharp fangs. The name's Hirano Aia, Greenie. Let's win this. Izuku couldn't say he knew what expectations he had from this test, but it certainly wasn't this. Holy crap, Hirano says beside him, gaping at the suddenly expanded space they were in, emulating what seemed to be a foggy city. The smog was extremely disadvantageous to those without sight-enhancing or terrain-specific quirks. They were just outside of the safe house, and were one of the many robbers assigned to catch the cops. Behind them were the 4 heavy hitters in their group, 3 of the students possessing mutant quirks while the last one had some type of sense quirk, which was excellent for weeding out cops wanting to break into the safe house. The 4 students were assigned to guard the area, whilst the rest brought back as many cops as they could. With this smog, I think our best bet for getting around is through the rooftops, he says to Hirano. There will be less smog there, and it'll give us a greater vantage point. We can get down later once we've gotten a proper idea of the layout. Sounds like a plan, Greenie, she replies, cracking her knuckles. Alright, how's about a free ride to the nearest rooftop? She asks, rolling her neck and getting on all fours. Suddenly, the metal bracelets she was wearing extended into full gauntlets protecting her palms. It's better that you save your energy, Izuku counters, taking out his own transportation. Besides, I've got my own ride, he says, smirking. With a small fluck, his grappling gun latches onto the nearest rooftop and pulls him to the top. Laughing, Hirano grinds her heavy-duty boots into the ground, the lining around her soles lighting up a neon purple, and follows, climbing up the side of the building with incredible speed, just like a panther on the prowl. It's begun. Shoyuta looks over the arena in the stands with Ms. Joke, eyes straining to spot a head of green under all the fog. He could have sworn he just saw what looked like an extended cord shooting over something. He could only hope that it was Midoriya using his grappling gun, which also implied he had a plan. Hopefully. Take a chill pill, Eraser. Your kid's gonna do fine. By the way, being a single parent must be hard, yeah? Why don't we get married to fix that? Ha ha ha. Inwardly groaning, Shoyuta decides to passively observe. Even though most of what Joke said was annoying, she was right in that he had nothing to worry about. Midoriya has proved to him time and time again that he was capable in every sense. It's just, Midoriya's the only kid he's got left. It was obvious from the start that he would get a little attached. He couldn't help but want the kid he spent so much time teaching and worrying and fussing over to succeed. Cammy, I sound like a parent? He thinks, scrunching his face up into a small grimace. I need a drink with my idiot friends after this. Hirano and Izuku peer over the ledges, mapping out the routes multiple cops were taking and laying out plans to catch some of them by surprise. Since both of their abilities weren't all that great for an all-out confrontation, stealth was going to be their best friend. Thankfully, the smog was already helping them out in that regard. Alright, if we can maintain this sense of calm and catch them by surprise without alerting anyone, we'll have the advantage for a pretty long time. All we need to do is quietly get their receptors with our ammo. We also have to make sure we can retreat immediately after the deed is done so that we can avoid extended confrontation as long as possible, Izuku rapidly explains. So as long as we don't disrupt their sense of security, we'll be fine. If you need help, I've got a lot of stuff that can help out. Actually, maybe it's a good idea if I give you some of them just in case. The Granette immediately shuts up when he realizes he's rambling. This was really not the time for this. Instead of stopping him though, Hirano is listening with rapt attention. Upon realizing he wasn't going to continue, she grins. Hey, don't psych yourself out, Greenie. We got this. She says simply, playfully punching his shoulder. Feeling warm, he sets his shoulders and nods back. Alright, let's do this. Remember, carefully and qui. Boom. Etly. He squeaks, gaping a little at the explosion that just came from the center area. There were bits of debris flying around and multiple blue and red lights that were barely visible in the smog, revealing those caught and hit by both sides. Well, that's one way of doing it, I guess, Hirano says dryly, rolling her eyes. Snorting shakily, Izuku shakes his head and ignores the commotion, letting his eyes focus on the cops distracted by the explosion a few blocks away. On the bright side, he says. We don't really need a proper distraction anymore. Awesome, Hirano replies, liking over her fangs and smirking widely. Snack time. Satoshi just wanted to pass this test. Being in a school like Shiketsu Academy meant that there were a lot of expectations placed upon their shoulders. It was mostly understandable, seeing as they were the school currently rivaling the Yui Academy. Either way, he was not going to fail this test, not with 3 of his classmates standing by him. Sakura huffs in annoyance, leaving the rear of their formation to talk to Bozo in front. The 2 students were some of the best in their class, which was why Satoshi felt pretty confident in their success. Sakura had a quirk that paralyzed someone if they kept eye contact with her for at least 3 seconds. The longer they remain in eye contact, the longer the other is paralyzed for. Bozo, on the other hand, had a versatile reptile mutation. He could camouflage like a chameleon, climb walls like a lizard, and had pretty tough skin, making him an all-rounder. Daichi, their other teammate, could produce charged energy blasts from his mouth. Satoshi, however, had a more subtle quirk. He had the ability to increase the sensitivity of someone's senses. Overloading into one sense can be really detrimental to one's focus and perception, which was why he was in the group. The backup, so to speak. Sighing, he waits for the girl ahead of him to fall back into formation. He was currently the only one guarding the rear now. Behind him, poisonous magenta and radioactive green cut through the fog and dropped down silently behind the group. The second-year girl then approached with impressive agility, imitating a cat. She slowly curled up behind Satoshi before finally catching him around the mouth and throat, pulling him back into the shadows with her slightly enhanced strength, his teammates none the wiser. Izuku used this opportunity to get in front of their first victim, holding one of the plastic ball he had in his hand. "Thanks for being our warm-up, Shiketsu-kun," Hirano whispered into the boy's ear before the ball was touched to his receptor and he only saw blue. The next thing he registers once the light disappears is the rest of his classmates getting caught up in a strange goop that was deployed by the green-haired boy. In no less than a few seconds, the boy takes care of Sakura and Bozo with what looked like eskrima sticks, putting down the two toppers with brutal hits to their soft spots and touching their receptors like it was nothing. His companion, on the other hand, purred in glee as she danced and toyed around with Daichi, easily avoiding all the small energy blasts coming from his mouth. Eventually, she grows bored and swipes at the short boy with her extended nails, claws, before finally swinging over him using the bar attached to the wall above them, shooting her ammo perfectly into his receptor after somersaulting. "Show off," the green-haired boy huffs, smiling. However, before he could move, Sakura widened her eyes and locked onto the boy's green gaze. "A little payback for getting us," she sneered, wincing in pain as she tried to get out of the green goop holding her and Bozo in place. The reptilian student, on the other hand, was still in disbelief over what just happened. It took 30 seconds of the grenette's companion shaking him by the shoulders before he finally broke out of his paralysis, blinking in shock. After breaking out of it, the boy sent both his companion and their group an apologetic smile before whipping out a grappling gun and taking off. The last thing he remembered before he was sent to the robber's safe house with the rest of his classmates was realizing that the boy grappling away with green hair was the only student he saw wearing a Yui uniform during orientation. What the hell was Yui doing with their students? Isn't he supposed to be quirkless or something? "I can't believe we got dunked on by a quirkless motherfucker." Sakura whines, still trying to pick out the green goop that remained stuck to her costume. Daichi, Bozo, and Satoshi trailed behind her, shoulders slumped in disbelief and shock. It was more or less absolute chaos in the arena. Izuku doesn't remember how many people he and Hirano have caught and sent to the safe house. At this point, he can safely say they were beyond 15 at least. There were definitely a few close calls, especially when Hirano got caught by one of the Ketsubutsu students and was sent to the center arena. The area was practically no man's land, with how many students, robbers and cops alike, were stationed there. Luckily, Izuku didn't get this far without being stubborn. After getting the Ketsubutsu student, he took one look at the girl's dismay as she was carted away and decided he was gonna get her out even though it was practically suicide. He had one chance, he sure as hell was gonna use it. There were 3 minutes left on the clock when he dropped a device he's been working on to the ground. He engineered it to release a low-level voltage that covered 7 feet of ground. With many of the cops stunned, he channeled his inner Spider-Man and swung into the jail area, reaching his hand out to Hirano. "Hirano!" Eyes wide, the girl smiles in amazement. "You're effing crazy, Greenie!" she exclaims, cackling as she held on to his hand. Before anyone could do anything about the lost prisoner, the two of them were already hidden by the smog, agitated yells echoing behind them. By the time they both made a rough landing into one of the buildings by crashing through the window, a loud buzzer was heard declaring the end of stage. "Holy crap," Izuku breathes out, staring up at the ceiling in a starfish position. "You're actually stupid crazy. You could have gotten caught." Hirano yells, trying to be mad even with a smile forcing itself on her face. "Yeah, I get that. He replies, laughing. The two of them look at each other with matching smiles, and something clicks into place. "Cammy, now that you've technically risked your hide to save me, I guess there's no other choice but to stay friends, huh? She asks, slowly getting up. Dusting the glass shards off of her costume, she then reaches out her hand to the boy, smiling gratefully. Yeah, I guess so, he says, smiling shyly. He clasps onto her arm and they both get up, walking back to the main grounds. Stage 2 of the exam was a rescue simulation, something that to his knowledge happened every year without fail. The only thing that changes is the terrain, but otherwise the same organization was employed to teach the heroes in training exactly how important it is to communicate with your fellow heroes, and the very base fundamentals of what makes a hero. Unlike stage 1 of the exam, Izuku was less nervous and jittery with Hirano by his side. With his newfound confidence, the rest of the test went by without a hitch. Hirano joked at one point that he was practically made for this part of the test. He was nurturing and caring by nature, so he was a natural choice for comforting the victims while others stabilized structures and distracted the villain, who was Gang Orca, so cool. He does have some regrets though, namely the burnt sleeve of his costume, and the rips on his pants, and the soot and ash on his back, and yeah, Majima-sensei was not going to be happy with him. Least to say, by the end of stage 2, Izuku was utterly exhausted. The only thing left keeping him awake were the results. Those numbers were going to determine if he was going to get his provisional license or not. He had to be alert for this. Scrambling to find his footing among the crowd, Hirano catches him before he trips into someone else. He smiles sheepishly in thanks. Ugh, I hate crowds, she grumbles, wincing as someone steps on her foot. Finally, the huge screen in front of them lit up, displaying all 760 students who passed stage 1, with a few of the 760 being highlighted in red. Izuku quickly deduces that the red-colored names were those of the 50% who didn't pass. Gulping, Izuku strains his green eyes to search for his name among the many others displayed on the screen. He could feel Hirano doing the same beside him, the hand she placed on his shoulder to keep him from tripping clutching a little more tightly than it was before. Their nervous energy seemed to bounce off of each other until he heard a gasp from Hirano. Startled, he turned towards her only to see a bright smile on her face. I'm number holy sheet. Greenie, I'm number 84 out of 760 FING people. Her hand is now shaking his shoulder in excitement and glee, and Izuku reciprocates her excitement by laughing with her. That's so amazing, oh gosh. Do you know how rare it is to break the top 100 in a provisional license exam? You're so cool, Hirano. The girl smirks and catches him into a headlock, all of it sudden, rubbing her knuckles onto his head. Stop being so modest, you crazy kid. I only achieved that cause of your help, she says as he squawks and tries to pull away, whining. Finally, once the short-haired girl lets him go, he turns back to the screen only to be held by the shoulders once again by Hirano. Midoriya, holy crap, I found your name. She whispers, eyes wide. Where? He cries, turning his head in all directions before Hirano is slapping his head in urgency. Freaking look at the top 50. She screeches. Letting his eyes wander, Izuku's breath escapes him when he sees his name as number 48 on the scoreboard. Oh my god, he whispers, rubbing his eyes twice just to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. You're kidding, you have to be kidding me. As Izuku goes through his mental breakdown, Hirano can only smirk and ruffle the kid's hair proudly. She's known him for only a few hours, but she could somehow already tell that they were going to be good friends. Hey, Midoriya Izuku! Someone yells within the crowd. Wadash! Izuku mumbles, suddenly snapped out of his internal screaming. His eyes go wide when he processes that every eye in the room is now looking at him. The one who called his attention was the blue-haired kid he saw at the start of the initial portion of the exam. The ponytailed boy was now looking at him with awe in his eyes, practically vibrating in excitement. Are you that quirkless Yui student? Thus began the chaos. Shoyuta barely managed to get the kid out of the swarm of hero students burying him under their questions and enthusiasm. It was a good thing that he got him out when he did too, because as soon as he ushered the overwhelmed boy shakily clutching his phone and letter out of the building, his keen ears caught the tail end of some students' comments. You can't believe the dude managed to break the top. You guys think he paid his way in or something? I can't believe some of these people actually think he's good or whatever. I'm sure he cheated his way into being that high in the scoreboard. He's quirkless. I don't want to be mean, but like, he's quirkless. Doesn't it seem weird to you guys? He doesn't look like much to me. Some of these people are dumbass if they think a powerless loser like him actually made it on his own. There's gotta be some conspiracy to this. No way this just happened. You think Yui is doing some kind of charity work or something? Hisashi's voice echoed in his head, reminding him to keep his cool. He was so incredibly proud of his student, but hearing those comments made him extremely bitter. Didn't his kid prove himself enough? Shaking his head, he guides his student towards the private vehicle waiting for them by the buses when they're suddenly stopped by a yell. "Hey, Greenie, wait up," a girl yells. Shoyuta observes Midoriya relax in mild shock, watching as his student turns around to smile at the tall brunette. "Hirano H.A." Midoriya answers. Granette then looks at his teacher a little sheepishly, darting his eyes towards the car. Blinking, Shoyuta sighs and nods his head. 5 minutes, kid, he says, squeezing his shoulder before turning around to walk towards the car. Izuku looks back to the auburn-haired girl, yelping when he was suddenly brought into a brief side hug. The next thing he knows, the girl snatches his phone from his hands and enters in her contact details, setting her name to "I Can Kid a Beach," before finally handing the device back to him. "There, now we can stay in touch," she says, grinning. Izuku smiles back even through the haze of embarrassment, letting out a few huffs of laughter when she shoves her own phone towards him. After putting in his own contact info, she looks at him one more time before ruffling his hair. "I'm glad I didn't let other people's opinions keep me from getting to know you, Midoriya," she finally says. She then flashes her fangs and winks at him. "Screw the haters, right?" Beaming, the brunette nods in utter gratefulness, feeling the telltale sting of tears behind his eyes. He was wondering when it was all going to settle in. Sniffing, Izuku responds in kind. "Screw the haters," he says, joyfully waving goodbye to Hirano as she walks back towards her class. He clutches the letter containing his provisional license close to his heart, discreetly trying to wipe away his tears before getting into the car. He couldn't wait to tell his mother everything that happened. The house was quiet when he finally finished his homework, his back finally being able to relax against his chair. Huffing, he sits there for a few more minutes just staring at the pictures above his desk before getting up and heading outside. He's on his way to enter the living room when his mother's voice stops him in his tracks. It sounds like she was on the phone. Staying hidden behind the wall, he listens. "So, what's the verdict, Ko-chan?" There's only silence for a few seconds before suddenly her mouth opens to release a hearty laugh. He could almost picture her red eyes glowing in happiness and pride. "Hey, of course Izuku did it. Have you seen the ball on that kid? We should celebrate. Maybe go eat out or something. Maybe this can finally get the brat out of his room for Unk." The pause. His mother sighs. "Yeah, I know. Ever since Izuku got into Yui he's been quiet. You would think the brat would lose his rockers over finding out Izuku got into that DMN hero school, but nothing. No anger, no happiness, no disbelief, just a whole lot of nothing." Another pause. "Yeah, well, even if I can't bring my stubborn kid, I will make sure we celebrate this. It's not easy breaking into the top 50 of a provisional license exam, you know. I did my DMN research." The two mothers exchange a few more words before finally cutting the call and sending their house back into the silence it was once in. Sighing, the blonde woman pockets her phone and walks inside the kitchen. Still needed to finish dinner. Behind the wall, Katsuki's eyes look to the ground, conflicting feelings creating a war in his head and heart. He hated him. He admired him. He's useless. He's everything you're not. He's going to get himself killed. He won second place. He never wants to see him again. I miss him. He never protected you. He never ran away. He's never going to be a hero. He already is. Clenching his jaw, Katsuki walks back to his room, refusing to come out even when the old hag called him down for dinner. When the blonde finally falls asleep, his dreams are about piggybacking on his shoulders and declaring the opening of their hero agency to the rest of their schoolmates. Izuku tiredly walked down the street after his long day. After he got his provisional license, it was back to business as usual being a UE student. What that meant for him was grueling training, a lot of studying, going to different classes, visiting Eri-chan, restraining a mugger on the way home because of course, and finally heading home. Do you just not have the ability to be normal, problem child? Mental Sensei asks, imitating that exasperated way of talking that Sensei had when it came to him. Shut up, Sensei, he grumbled under his breath. Sighing, he continues his walk when he suddenly spots a head of blonde hair sitting on the sidewalk. Faltering in his steps, Izuku couldn't help but to stop and let his eyes run over Katsuki's form. It was an old habit he had when they were children, where Izuku wanted to make sure he was okay, that his bullies never turned to his little brother instead of him. After he was sure that the boy was fine, Izuku started fidgeting. Does he just? Even after the literal lifetime we've spent together, I still don't know how to act around you. He thinks sadly, slumping his shoulders. Are you just gonna keep staring, nerd? Startling out of his thoughts, Izuku widens his eyes in shock. He spoke to me, he thinks dumbly. Shaking his head, he opens his mouth to reply only to come up empty. He tries multiple times to come up with something until finally he just settles for Ken, he says softly. The younger boy tenses and then stares at him for a few more seconds, piercing ruby eyes looking over him. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his calloused hands holding up his face. He was clearly thinking about something before Izuku arrived. I heard you got your demon license, he finally says, turning his head until he was no longer looking at him. Biting his lip, Izuku took a deep breath and then sighed. He wasn't weak, helpless Deku anymore. He was stronger and more aware of his abilities. He's no longer the person Katsuki thinks he is. He has to prove that to him. I did, he says confidently, squaring his shoulders. We're going to be discussing internships next week, he adds. Silence falls over them both at that, like a tiny bubble keeping them separate from the rest of the world. Izuku stood there and waited, watching as the light from the setting sun shone over Katsuki and him both. When I get into Yui, he finally says, breaking the quiet. I'm gonna kick your butt, and you better prove that you deserved that second place. You better prove that this all isn't just some fluke. You better prove that you aren't what that 2-bit extra said you were. 'Cause if you don't. Briefly shutting his eyes close, Izuku nods. I know, Kaken, he whispers. Smiling, Izuku hesitantly adds, don't you think Deku sounds a lot like Dikairu? The blonde snorts. Sounds like something dumb only you would come up with. Izuku hummed in response, and then started walking once again. Just before he left, he tilted his head to the side and locked his gaze with Katsuki. I'll see you around, Kaken. A million different emotions ran through Katsuki's eyes before he finally huffed and looked away. Whatever. When Izuku finally enters his house, he takes off his blazer, loosens his tie, passes by the mirror, and feels hopeful. As he gets ready to eat dinner, he runs a hand over the provisional license that sits neatly on his desk, an image of his smiling face and the name, Dikai, printed boldly on the front. Inko has lived with her son for 16 years now, and up to now, she has never heard her son's phone buzz with notifications this much in one single day. As they both sat at the dinner table to eat, Izuku skillfully ignored the buzzing from his phone like a man on a mission. Izuku, honey, are you not going to answer that? She finally asks, worriedly alternating glances between her son and his phone. Mom, he says very calmly. 14 people forced their numbers into my phone from the day of the provisional license exam. It hasn't stopped buzzing since I got home from that day. I've tried muting it, but I always feel terrible afterwards. I've tried replying, but it just makes them more enthusiastic to text back. He says, smiling at her with deadpan eyes. All of them? She asks warily, the both of them looking at the buzzing phone like it was going to grow legs and suffocate them in their sleep. Izuku pauses. No, mostly just Yukihira-kun. He's very enthusiastic, he finally says, thinking back to the blue-haired boy from all those days ago. I see. The both of them stare at the buzzing phone for a moment longer before Inko speaks up once again. Maybe mute it for the moment? Yeah, probably a good idea. Izuku. Kihara exclaims happily, running towards the green-haired boy the moment he stepped through the support classroom. Izuku still remembers the first time the eccentric girl did this. The first time had the freckled boy blushing and stuttering and practically combusting on the spot. Not very good for Izuku's mental health. No sir. Now, Izuku just braces himself for impact and lets the dark-skinned, purple-haired girl barrel into him like a bull on a rampage, steadying the both of them so that they don't fall into whatever hellborn invention Fukumoto was crafting with his metal vomit. He lets the girl squeeze him in her surprisingly strong grip until she finally lets go. It was so boring without you, she whined as she stepped back. Right, Emo-kun? She yells to her best friend, who was sitting at his station nonchalantly wielding a flamethrower. Super boring, the ash blonde says, as he activates the flamethrower. Perhaps the Izuku of then would stare incredulously at the very, very dangerous and not boring weapon, but the Izuku of now only stares at the machine in interest. Normal flamethrowers? He asks, eyebrows raised. Wow, you really are bored. Exactly. Kihara whines. Abruptly, the bright-eyed girl goes to stare at him with a mischievous smile on her face. Good luck getting out of this one, kid. Mental Sensei says and dryly laughs at him. Which is why. She draws out playfully. Emo-kun and I were thinking, since Majima-sensei said he was going to be a little late to class today. I hope this doesn't get me expelled, is the only thing that Izuku can think as he is pulled into whatever the hell kind of experiment they were about to perform. He's pretty sure that if they were to do this outside of Yui, they would be arrested or something. Welp, if you can't stop him, join him. 10 minutes later, Majima-sensei stands outside of the burnt classroom in utter shock and incredulity. Et2 Midoriya? He says weakly, turning to the green-haired boy with ash in his hair. He was just about to enter the classroom with the thought in mind that he was going to spare the boy some slack, seeing as he had won his bet from 2 days prior. You can only resist them for so long, sensei, he says as a reply, Kihara and Morita hanging behind him with innocent, angelic smiles on their faces. Innocent, angelic smiles covered in ash and soot, and were Kihara's overalls still burning? Majima ponders the pros and cons of quitting all of his jobs and becoming a hermit. Oh, the sweet, tension-free bliss. It was almost the end of the school day by the time Cementos finally finished their lesson. Once the bell finally rang, everyone slowly started to groan and stretch out their backs in relief. Unfortunately for some of the 1B students though, their day was only going to begin as they had to take extra lessons to prepare for the license exam in the coming 6 months. Luckily for the Greenette, he had no such need for those lessons. Yawning, Izuku picks up his bag and waves goodbye to his 1B friends before re-entering his own classroom to wait for Aizawa-sensei's final class. His teacher did say he had something special planned before the day ended. He wonders what it was? Dropping his bag on the floor by his chair, he tiredly falls into his seat and waits. He didn't have to wait long. Midoriya-chan. My favorite first year. A blonde-haired girl exclaimed, entering his classroom with a bang. Izuku could only flinch and gape as flashbacks of his hellish summer camp flickered through his head. Emily-senpai. He greets, silently saying a prayer in his head. It's then that Aizawa-sensei enters the classroom, his eye twitching in annoyance. Emily, I didn't even debrief him yet. Stand outside with the others, he says curtly. Emily-senpai pouts and huffs, but complies after winking at the concerned Greenette still reeling in his seat. As the door finally shuts behind her, Aizawa-sensei turns to Izuku only to see the kid look at him with utter betrayal on his face. Sensei, why? He asks, traumatized eyes staring into his very soul. I know, kid. I know. But she's a part of the big three for a reason. Anyways, now that you have your license, there are going to be internships coming up pretty soon. Who better than to brief you on that other than the current big three? Sensei says, sighing in that long-suffering way of his. Anyhow, even though they're interesting characters, you'll find that they do have a lot of experience and knowledge under their belt when it comes to this stuff. So, for the next hour, listen and learn to what they have to say, okay kid? At the mention of internships, Izuku sat up a little straighter. Sensei was right, The big three were the best students in heroics of the whole school. If anyone had good advice on this matter, it would be them. Steeling himself, he smiled determinedly and nodded his head. Yes, sensei. Shoyuta couldn't help but grin back. Seeing the resolve in his students' eyes always reminded him that Izuku Midoriya was here for a reason, and it wasn't due to mere luck. Alright, he says. With that, let me introduce you to our big three. Dazai Emily, Makoto Raiden, and Kyoko Yori. At his cue, 3 third-year students enter the classroom with varying levels of enthusiasm. The first, Emily-senpai, was obviously the most enthusiastic of the bunch. Her blonde hair bounced in a ponytail behind her as she smiled widely at Izuku. The next one, Makoto-senpai, had ink-black hair and calm, ocean-blue eyes. The boy was tall and easily towered over his blonde companion. Although he wasn't as enthusiastic as her, he still sent Izuku a calm, pleasant smile. Finally, a girl with brown eyes and ginger hair entered the classroom. It was apparent from her whole demeanor that she was bored and very not into the whole teaching shtick. As she ran a hand through her pixie cut, she still sent a tired smile Izuku's way. You three know the drill. If you need me, I'll be sleeping in the corner. Make sure it's for emergencies only, he says, and then promptly zips himself up into his yellow sleeping bag before settling against the corner of the room. The 4 students are suspended in awkward silence for about 2.5 seconds before Emily-senpai bounces in place and sends an excited smile Izuku's way. Now that sensei's passed out in the corner, I can finally continue. How's my favorite first year? She asks, Makoto-senpai calmly holding on to the back of her collar. To keep her from pouncing on the poor boy. Fine, senpai. He says, sending a grateful look the Ravenette's way. The questions continue to come until the bouncy blonde finally calms down. Crossing her arms, she sighs. Okay, since we're supposed to be actually teaching you stuff, why don't we start by telling you our quirks? Knowing where your abilities lie is the first step to choosing the right person to intern with. She says. At this, Makoto-senpai nods in agreement. Alright, if we're going that route, I guess I can go first, Kyoko-senpai says, stepping forward. Alright kiddo, I think that from the 3 of us, I'm going to be able to help you out the most. After hearing that you were quirkless, it was kind of a given that you would be getting into underground heroics, which is what I'm aiming for too, she says. Suddenly, she starts to approach him until she's right beside him, her hand reaching out to ruffle his hair. Aiwa, Izuku says in mild shock. Kyoko-senpai snorts at his expression. Just wanted to see if it was as fluffy as it looked, she smirks. And hey, quick question, did you ever fracture your right arm? Oh, and did you by any chance bruise your ribs multiple times recently? She asks, tilting her head knowingly. Emily can only giggle at the dumbfounded expression on the first year's face. How? Izuku asks, gaping. Kyoko-senpai just smirks wider. My quirk, kid, is called pinpoint. Although I did want to ruffle your hair, it was also for a demonstration. If I'm able to touch somebody anywhere on their body, I can see and pinpoint all of their weak or vulnerable spots. Although it's not a combative quirk, it's super helpful for the type of heroics I'm aiming to get into. Izuku's eyes sparkle and his hands immediately dive for his notebook. That's so cool. Does prolonged contact affect its effectiveness? Do you really see weak spots, or are they just areas that are more vulnerable than normal? Does this work on mutations too? Is there a limit to how many people you can use your quirk on? How do you determine a weak spot? Is it like a color? Or words? Or a feeling? Jesus kid. Breath for a second, will ya? Kyoko-senpai says, both eyebrows raised in shock. Izuku flushes. Yeah, sorry. It's a habit I'm still trying to break, huh? He says, smiling embarrassedly. Kyoko-senpai sighs in response. Don't worry about it, kid. People in the hero course and the support course usually have a special something about them that makes them different from the others. Trust me on that, she says dryly. Anyways, why don't you go next, Raikuen? The ginger says, looking to the Ravenet. The boy simply nods before stepping forward. My quirk is magnotelekinesis, he says calmly. I am able to control matter and bend it to my will through magnetism. Although I have a weight limit to how much I can carry, I have honed it enough to be able to stop a train in its tracks, he says, nonchalantly. A train? Izuku screeches in his head, dumbfounded. Aside from that, with enough focus, I can bring metal up from the ground. Though it's not easy, I've trained my quirk enough to be able to do it without passing out. The pause. I also installed a metal tooth at the back of my mouth in case of emergencies, he thoughtfully added. That's actually really cool. Izuku thinks. He has a lot more questions, but learning from Kyoko-senpai, he decides to save them for later. Finally, my turn. Emily-senpai exclaims happily. As you could have guessed from the last time we met, my quirk is elastic limbs. In a second, Emily-senpai's right arm suddenly stretched out to pat Izuku on the head, all the way from the front of the classroom. Izuku can only blush in embarrassment and slight awe. Retracting her arm back, the blonde continues. Even though it's a pretty generic power, it's really helpful for heroics. The length to which I can stretch my limbs depends on how many body parts I'm using. For example, if I just channel my quirk into my right arm, I could probably wrap it around you 5 times over. She happily says. On the other hand, if I were to use my quirk in both my arms, the length would get slightly limited. That goes for how many body parts I'm trying to stretch at once, she finishes. Clapping her hands together, Emily-senpai smiles widely. Alright, with that done and over with, let's discuss all the juicy stuff you need to know about the internships. She means important, Kyoko-senpai inserts dryly. Yes, same thing. The blonde says, waving her hand dismissively. Let's start. Least to say, it was probably the longest hour of his whole life. Even so, as he tiredly made his way back home, he felt a little more calm when thinking about the internships. Although he still had to find someone who would be willing to take him in, he felt a little more sure on his feet and not so much like a headless chicken not knowing what the hell they were doing. Releasing a little sigh, he ran a hand through his hair. Even though I'm grateful, I still hope I'm never stuck in a room with Emily-senpai for a whole hour ever again. He thinks exasperatedly. Izuku is on the way to the classroom with his lunch tray in hand, wanting just one blissful hour of peace when he's suddenly stopped by a yell at the end of the hallway. Yo, Midoriya! Mirio-senpai cheerfully calls out, waving his hand enthusiastically. Izuku scrunches his face up into an ugly expression as he tries to prevent his tears from spilling into his miso soup. Lunch Rush didn't deserve getting his meals destroyed by despair. Are you sure you're okay? Mirio-senpai asks for the nth time, a comforting hand on his back. His face is stuck in a worried expression as they both enter his classroom. Yeah, totally. Sorry about that. Izuku said, wiping his face and laughing sheepishly. Well, if you're sure. The blonde's face brightens up into a smile. I guess I can finally tell you why I'm here. Okay, so I'm not sure if you remember, but the organization that Eri was involved with was actually something that the Night Eye Agency was looking into. He starts. Oh yeah, I remember Nedza-sensei mentioning that while he was reprimanding me. Izuku trails off, remembering the scary encounter. Yep. Mirio-senpai says, ignoring Izuku's flashback moment. Now, you might not know this, but I'm actually an intern at Night Eye's agency and… What? Izuku shrieks, his jaw practically on the floor. Mirio-senpai, you're interning with All Might's only sidekick and one of the most well-known hero agencies in Japan? That's so cool. What is Night Eye actually like? Do you know the full extent of his quirk? Have you ever? Whoa, relax Midoriya-kun. Ha. Mirio-senpai says, placing his hands on his shoulder. Although he looked a little flustered, he was still smiling brightly. Sorry, senpai. I'm working on it, I promise. Izuku says, wanting to bash his head against something very solid. It's no problem, Midoriya-kun. We need that kind of enthusiasm nowadays. He says, winking and giving him a thumbs up. I'm not sure if you're just trying to be nice or you actually think this isn't weird. Izuku thinks, sweat dropping. Anyways, as I was saying, I came here to inform you that Night Eye-san actually wanted you to take an interview for an internship at his agency. He says cheerfully. Silence. Midoriya-kun? Tagata can only look on in worry as his underclassmen went totally catatonic in front of his very eyes. I was having a great day. She went to school, kicked everyone's butts during practical lessons, ate her homemade bento, visited her father in the hospital, scared away some bullies troubling a little kid, and was now on the way home from the grocery store after buying some ice cream because she deserved one cheat day, damn it. Absolutely nothing could destroy her good mood. As she released a big yawn, the buzzing of her phone in her pocket alerted her that someone was trying to reach her. Checking the dial screen, she smirked as she saw the name of the greenette she constantly talked to. The kid was good company, and she valued his friendship a lot. Accepting the call, she put the phone to her ear and opened her mouth. "What's up, Greenie? Hirano, you just got an invite to Nightai's agency, oh my god?" Midoriya yelled, shrieking like a banshee. F dash, she said under her breath, almost dropping her ice cream in shock. She stands in the middle of the road gaping, her phone placed away from her ear for one hot second before. "What the hell do you mean you got an invite to Nightai's agency?" Yeah, her day just got that much better. Moving almost robotically alongside Midoriya-senpai, Izuku had to remind himself multiple times that he had everything with him. His internship form? His rehearsed speech? His confidence? Debatable. His moral support? An image of his friends, Hirano, Aizawa-sensei, and his mom flash through his head. He can totally do this. He was going to smash this interview. "We're here!" Midoriya-senpai exclaims happily, standing outside Nightai's office. "Never mind, I can't do this." Gulping, he tightens his hold on the straps of his backpack and takes a deep breath. "All right," he says, staring at the looming door. "It's just a door, problem child. You just twist the doorknob and go inside," Mental Sensei says matter-of-factly. Ignoring his weird conscience, he looks to Midoriya-senpai for a little encouragement. Seeing the nervousness on his friend's face, he smiles comfortingly. "Don't worry about it, Midoriya, you've got this. And hey, here's some advice, try your best to make Night-Eye laugh. The guy always loves some good humor." The blonde says, sending the greenette 2 thumbs up. "All right," he says in response, eyes shifting once more back to the door. "Well, here goes nothing." Tagata was just a teensy tiny bit worried. Night-Eye doesn't just call anyone in for the fun of it, despite how much the man loved good humor. He was a serious pro-hero when it came to his agency and those who worked under it, and the fact that Midoriya Izuku kind of inserted himself in a situation that was being looked into by his agency may have left a little bit of a bitter taste in the hero's mouth. Though Tagata was immensely grateful that little Eri was safe and sound with Yui, he had visited a few times with Tamaki and Nijire, it still meant that whatever leads that they had on the Yakuza group was now flushed down the toilet as they were now laying low. Even with that going against Midoriya a tiny bit, Tagata was still positive he would make a good enough impression on Night-Eye. Although he's only hung out with the first year a few times, he knew that the quirkless boy had a heart of gold and a hard-working spirit, which is exactly what the Night-Eye agency needs. Those were the qualities that got him accepted into the agency in the first place, so he's sure that if the hero could look past what the greenette has already done, he would be glad to welcome him too. Even so, it's been a while since he left Midoriya in Night-Eye's office. Probably 30 minutes or more. Did his interview take that long? "What's got you looking so worried, Mirio?" a voice asks from behind him. Turning around, he smiles as the face of Bubble Girl enters his vision. Nothing really. Just being a concerned senpai," he says, hands on his hips and his signature smile in place. "Oh, is someone from your school here for an internship?" the sidekick asks curiously. "Yeah, actually. It's been more than 30 minutes and..." "What?" The adult and teenager hanging out in the hallway jump at the sudden screech, and immediately bolt it to Night-Eye's office fearing the worst. However, as the sidekick opens the door with her quirk ready to attack, her alert stature abruptly falters as she registers what exactly is going on. Tagata looks over her shoulder in equal dumbfoundment. "What do you mean the rebooted version of All Might's Mighty Adventures was better than the original?" "That's so. And how can you think that All Might's feature in Hero Daily was better than his feature on Today and Now?" The two shocked figures in the doorway could only look on in shock as the interviewee proceeded to argue his points to Night Eye in what frankly seemed like a Who Was the Superior All Might Fan, Part 1 out 3-book series, with a movie that will soon be available near you. Bubble Girl blinks slowly and then retreats out of the office with even steps. Tagata follows her willingly. The two All Might fans don't even notice. As the sidekick finally shut the door behind her, the two indulge in a moment of silence before Tagata opens his mouth to speak. Does that mean he's in? I don't even know. When Izuku returns home with a stamped internship form in hand, Inko is obviously in complete awe and happiness. She's just about to ask her son what happened and how everything went when the boy abruptly plops himself down on the couch and, for a lack of better words, starts to sulk. Inko has to remind herself multiple times that the stamp she saw on his internship form was definitely real before she went over to Izuku and sat by him. "Honey, what's wrong?" she asked, taking his hand into her own in worry. "I'm so jealous of Night Eye, Mum. He has like every single limited edition All Might poster, and then he has the gall to say that All Might's interview in Osaka was better than his interview in Poland a few years ago when obviously he was." Inko lets Izuku ramble for a few more seconds before she deliberately clears her throat to catch his attention once more. "That's unfortunate, but you did get the internship, didn't you?" she asks, very, very patiently. "Oh yeah." I managed to make Night Eye laugh, in like, the first few seconds because I tripped but then landed in a weird position because I didn't want to fall over his limited edition Silver Age All Might action figure and then the interview stuff happened. But Mom, he literally said that All Might's best work was going against a really strong villain 5 years ago, which was Toxic Chainsaw, but that was so not true, and then I showed him my favorite video of All Might saving all those people from a burning building in his debut and... Oh, Inko thinks wearily. So my son found another one. Inko wonders if she should start looking into religion more seriously. She's been praying a lot more lately since Izuku entered Yui. Pouting, Izuku accompanies Midoriya-senpai as they begin their patrol around the area. "You okay, Midoriya-kun?" Midoriya-senpai asks, one eyebrow raised as they pass by a park. "One of these days." Izuku mumbles mostly to himself. "One of these days I'm going to make nice and see it my way." Toxic Chainsaw? Really? Ridiculous. So it's just another one of their daily episodes. Tagata thinks. Exasperatedly, though admittedly pretty amused. It's been a few days since Izuku officially became an intern under the Night Eye agency, and it was quickly becoming a usual occurrence for the pro hero and the first year to be seen debating All Might's best moments back and forth. Even though people were slightly concerned at first, it quickly became apparent that it was just their form of bonding. God forbid anyone to try to interrupt or insert their own opinions though. The last time it happened honestly had Tagata thinking the poor guy was about to get decimated. Fine, but you can't deny that All Might had way more impact with the public during that era of his hero work. I can, but you fail to see that things start to slowly sink in during after his prime and after that one animal shelter rescue in 20XX, the pro-hero counters, his pointer finger pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. The greenette is just about to reply to the hero when a sidekick suddenly made themselves present. I actually think All Might's Bronze Age had the most impact on the public. Both intern and hero's head immediately snapped towards the poor sidekick with a gleaming mania in their eyes. Almost in sync, they both open their mouths to say just one thing. "How can you dare to even say that dash?" Least to say, the poor guy was almost in tears by the time the duo was finished with him. Everyone else in the agency just watched by the sidelines, some snacking on candy and sandwiches in intrigue while others looked about ready to spare the guy some slack and bring him out of firing range. "I hope I never find myself getting in between those two," Centipeder murmurs somewhere, shivering at the mere thought. Tagata couldn't help but silently agree. Even though it was kind of like watching reality TV live. Shaking himself out of the memory, the blonde gets his head back on track and stops at their usual crossroads. "Alright, I'll be patrolling my usual route from here. I'll see you back at this street in an hour, Midoriya-kun," Tagata says cheerfully, waving goodbye to the curly-haired boy. Half-heartedly giving his own wave of goodbye, Izuku continues his patrol in the opposite direction until the atmosphere of the beautiful day gets him smiling once again. As he continued to walk his route, he was stopped multiple times by a few adults and their kids asking him if he was that quirkless wonder in the sports festival, to which he replied yes, which then led to a few wanting photos and autographs. Izuku had never felt more unsure, overwhelmed, yet strangely giddy in a while. Laughing a little to himself, Izuku continues to patrol until his 1 hour comes to a close. Sighing, Izuku lets the warm weather wash over him as he makes his walk back to meet up with Midoriya-senpai. The greenette is just about to pass by an alley on the way there when he suddenly hears sounds of jeering and cruel laughter. Suddenly alert, Izuku pauses and then quietly ventures into the alley, keeping an ear out for any more information he can glean out of the scuffle that was happening. Although it didn't sound too serious, one could never be too sure, as Aizawa-sensei liked to say. Creeping a little bit closer, he could finally make out what was happening before his eyes. 2 middle school students with cruel smiles, laughing and mocking a crumpled student at the end of the alleyway. Punches and kicks being aimed at the shaking kid crouched on the floor, insulting and hurtful words being forced into the kid's ears. A repeated chant of villain's quirk, aimed at the shaking boy trying his best to just endure. Izuku saw red. "Get off of him!" he yelled, his heart beating fast in his chest. This hit too close to home, too close. "Who the hell do you think you are?" one of the students says, attention redirected to the hero in training before them. "Someone who can get you in trouble pretty dim and fast, since I'm currently interning with Nightai's agency," Izuku counters back, frowning deeply. A strange kind of anger was shimmering lightly in his gut, and he really didn't want to find out what would happen if it came to a boiling point. At the mention of the pro-hero's agency, the 2 middle schoolers immediately pale and balk when they start to register the hero costume that Izuku was wearing. "Crap, Nero, we need to leave, we can't have this sheet on our record," one of the bullies hissed to the other, who just hurriedly agreed and proceeded to vault over the chain fence at the end of the alleyway. Izuku could have given chase if he really wanted to, his anger was still present and steady after all, but he refrained when he set his eyes on the purple-haired boy trembling in pain on the grimy floor. Softening his eyes, Izuku sighed heavily before kneeling in front of the injured boy. "Hey," he said softly. "They're gone now, and I swear they won't be coming back anytime soon. Can you stand?" he asks, deliberately making exaggerated moves to show that he wasn't hostile. Tired purple eyes peeked up at him from his crouched position, wariness and unease circling through the boy's gaze before he finally gulped and nodded. "Here," Izuku says, extending his hand. The boy stares at him for a few seconds, simply assessing him, before hesitantly placing his hand in his own. The two slowly stagger out of the alleyway, the purple-haired boy grunting and hissing in pain the whole time, before finally reaching a relatively deserted park. Helping the boy sit down on a park bench, Izuku immediately gets his phone and sends a quick text to Midoriya-senpai saying that he would be delayed for a while. With that done, Izuku then reaches for whatever first aid he had on his person before treating the boy as much as he could. "I'm not the best at this stuff," Izuku says, grinning sadly. "But hopefully this will be enough until we can get you home and treated properly." The boy doesn't reply to Izuku's small talk, but the greenette continues anyway. There was a certain ache in his heart that just wouldn't go away after what he saw, and he couldn't help but want to talk to the boy more. Leaving him after witnessing something like that just didn't sit right with him. Finishing up, Izuku cleaned the last scrape that was visible on the boy's body before gathering all the dirty tissues and dumping them in the trash can nearby. Heading back, he worriedly looked over the hunched figure of the silent boy, before finally steeling his resolve and sitting next to him. Struggling to find a way to address what just happened, Izuku was taken off guard when the purple-haired boy decided to speak first. "Sorry for all of this," he said softly but bitterly, eyes to the ground. The air between them is quiet for a moment before Izuku releases a deep sigh. "Helping people is what my job is going to entail in the future, you know? This wasn't any trouble at all," Izuku replies, smiling sadly. "What they did to you, it was wrong and cruel." If you want to, you can give me the names of those boys and I can file a complaint against them, Izuku offered, even though he knew deep in his heart that the purple-eyed boy was going to refuse. It's what he would have done anyways. If I did that, I would just be more of a target, he says, looking away from Izuku. I just want to get to the end of the year in one piece even with my villain's quirk, he continues, spitting out the last two words like poison. Frowning, Izuku remembered the chanting of the two boys in the alleyway and immediately understood the issue. If it's any consolation, I don't think you have a villain's quirk, whatever it could be, Izuku says. No one's quirk is inherently evil. It's what you do with it that determines what it's seen as. Even the most heroic of quirks could be turned into something evil with the wrong intent. You wouldn't say that if you knew what it was, he replies, tense and defeated. People always go back on their words once they hear what my quirk is, he sighs. Try me, Izuku declares instead of backing off, bright eyes trained on the boy before him. I bet that I can come up with 5 different heroic uses of your quirk, whatever it is. The middle school student looks at the curly-haired boy, who was definitely not that much older than himself, sitting by him before plastering a bitter smile on his face. My quirk, he says, is brainwashing. If someone replies or answers to anything I say, I can take control of them and make them do whatever I want them to. There's only silence for a few seconds before. That's such a cool quirk. The greenette cries out, smiling giddily with stars in his eyes. The purple-haired boy is clearly taken aback at his response, his eyes wide and disbelieving. Do you know how many things you can do with a power like that? I wish I had my notebook for this. Anyways, first of all, you would be an absolute godsend during hostage situations. Do you understand how many casualties and how much wasted time would be saved with you on the scene incapacitating the villain with just a few words? Izuku practically exclaims, excitement running through his veins at the many possibilities being presented before him. Or how easy it would be to get someone out of a panic attack. Or how useful it would be in an interrogation. Or how you can use your power for recon and information gathering. Or how easily you could use it to de-escalate high-stress situations. Do you understand the multitude of opportunities that this quirk could be used for? It's incredible. Izuku continues to go on his tangent, not noticing the tears building up in the boy's eyes until he pauses to look at him. Startling at the state of the boy, Izuku fusses over the boy and lets his hands hover over his shoulders worriedly. Oh gosh, did I say something wrong? I'm so dash. No, I dash. The boy pauses to swallow a sob, smiling shakily. It's just that's the first time anyone has ever. Without him finishing, Izuku understands. With that, ignoring all social cues and his own anxiety, Izuku goes with his instincts and puts his hands on the boy's shoulders, bringing him into a gentle hug. The boy continues to tremble and shake against his shoulder, small gasping sobs escaping his mouth at the unexpected source of comfort. His body, heart, and mind was battered beyond belief, but the words of this boy suddenly reminded him of everything he was fighting for. The two stay like that for a while, neither of them paying much attention to the time, before the boy finally pulls back, his cheeks dusted a light pink in embarrassment. Thanks, he says a little awkwardly, sniffling and rubbing his eyes at his unexpected breakdown. It's no problem. Shinso Hitoshi. Shinsuken, then, Izuku says, smiling. The grenette then reaches out to grab the boy's hand, squeezing it comfortingly. If there's one thing I can say for sure, Shinsuken, it's that I'm sure you'll be great at whatever you decide to do in the future. Izuku says cheerfully, smiling wide. Though, maybe being a villain is off the table seeing as I now know who you are, he teases gently, garnering a wet chuckle from the purple-haired boy beside him. Yeah, he was going to be alright. Unbeknownst to the kids on the park bench, two glinting eyes watched them from afar hidden by the shadows. The figures silently took note of the one in the hero costume, and then disappeared. Time to report back to the boss. Midoriya Izuku was completely unassuming at first glance. To be completely honest, Mirai would have looked right over him if it weren't for his frankly baffling dream to be the first quirkless hero. Although it may be a small bit hypocritical coming from him, seeing as how limited his quirk was in the grand scheme of things, Mirai will still be the first one to admit that he wouldn't have gotten the respect, recognition, and assistance he needed to thrive in the hero community without the presence of his rare quirk. It was one of the factors that led to Toshi to All Might accepting him as a sidekick, no matter how much the selfless man tried to deny it. He was the primary brains of the duo for a reason, after all. Even then, with all of this foreknowledge and experience and hindsight, Midoriya-Izuku still took him by surprise and reminded him that in a world like theirs, where villains and superheroes and quirks with powers beyond the normal imagination existed, anything was possible. At first, he was simply a boy that could match his wits. A good intern, sure, one that followed instructions and did what needed to be done without complaint, but his spirit was what made him stand out to the infamous Night Eye. He thought that that was all it would be, but he was wrong. Mirio, of course, will always be his pride and joy. He nurtured him and mentored him to be a hero that will be able to stand next to the likes of All Might, even if one day he might have to stand in his shoes instead, and he will be forever proud of his potential to be the brightness that this world desperately needs. Sometimes, knowing the future was more of a curse than a blessing. He would know more than anyone else. Midoriya, though, was different in a way that reminded him of himself, and that is what makes him keep his eyes on the boy. Not his quirklessness or his performance as an intern or their daily banters, but the fact that he had a darkness inside him that most people overlooked. That the reason why he clung so much to kindness was so that he could push away the grit and gravel trying to claw its way into his very soul. Night Eye doesn't know much about Midoriya's history, and he doesn't know if he will ever be privy to that part of the boy's life, but what he does know is that his intern has taken something that was looked to be a burden and made it his strength. He knows that he has faced enough in his short life that his eyes immediately sharpen when faced with a threat that is not even fully there. He knows that the boy possesses enough darkness in his being that can engulf him whole, but filters it out with the good that he still believes exists in the world. Night Eye knows that just like him, Midoriya will be the type to make the hard decisions when nobody else will. He will do his best, of course. He will fight and claw and break himself over and over before it ever gets to a point where he will have to make that decision, but when the time comes where he needs to do it, he will not hesitate. Perhaps that is why he stays close. Perhaps that is why he keeps him in his sight and goes a little harder on him than anyone else. Midoriya reminds him so much of himself, in fact, that he can't even bear to think about him making the same mistakes he once made. So he works him hard, spits out cold and scathing words, and then soothes it afterwards with banter that will have his eyes lighting up in excitement. Night Eye can't help but stare sometimes at the burning viridian that has the potential to comfort and destroy at the flick of a switch, and then realizes much too late that he has taken the unassuming boy under his wing. Mirai, although slightly dumbfounded, finds himself accepting this fact faster than he would like to admit. Midoriya is. He is good in a way that most people take for granted. Night Eye will make sure that goodness stays right where it is meant to be. Being best friends with the #1 hero in the world gets you clued in on a lot of top-secret information, believe it or not. In fact, he was one of the first to ever know about Toshinori's previous condition and astounding quirk, not to mention his knowledge about people like All for One and other such high-ranking, hush-hush villains. However, what the general public don't speculate about too often is that he gets treated to a lot of personal information too. When it comes to All Might, to Toshinori, a man who more often than not likens himself to Atlas with the world on his back, Naomasa sees and hears more about his mundane struggles rather than the ones that eat him out from the inside. As his closest friend, it was his job to figure these issues out without having been explicitly told them. Unfortunately for him, all that the man knew how to do was smile, and it was only on particularly bad days where his distress would be made obvious. He still remembers the days when the blonde hero would fail in some way or another and sit in front of his mentor's grave for hours on end, staring blankly at the isolated tombstone of a woman who escaped from his childlike grasp far too soon. Sometimes, Naomasa couldn't help but hate her for the burden that she put on his friend's shoulders. Sometimes, Naomasa wishes she were still alive to keep him from breaking, because clearly he wasn't enough to keep this too good of a man together. Sometimes, Naomasa sits himself in front of her grave next to Toshinori and talks about the days where the burden wasn't as glaring. On these days, the tall man lets himself lean on him, letting the tightly held leash on his emotions loosen for even just a second. It's in those rare moments of vulnerability where he thanks her instead. With these thoughts floating around in his head, Naomasa presses the green button on his phone and puts the device up to his ear, an easy smile on his usually haggard face. The conversation leaves him slightly speechless, to be honest. By the time he ends the call, an hour has passed, and the light shining in from his small window is more blue than yellow. Midoriya-senpai, the boy has left him speechless since day one, and frankly stressed on the others, though he can see where his feelings about him shifted from problematic to good and bright and good. His precinct came around to the boy faster than he did, seeing as how he was coddled and congratulated from the moment they all realized this was more than a one-time gig. Naomasa was much more wary though, and didn't let himself get too close until a conversation with the Yui student made him pause. "Why do you want to become a hero, Midoriya?" he had asked one day, after taking a petty mugger out of his hands and buying him ice cream at Naomasa's insistence. "Oh, well, I guess I just want to save people," Midoriya had said simply, staring at his vanilla ice cream. He pauses, and I want to prove to people that I can, even without a quirk. Saving people, helping people, caring for people, anyone can do it if they try. My mom always said that intent was what mattered most, and to me, that just meant anyone can save people if only they wanted to do so. Midoriya adopts a sure expression on his face, as though he had thought of this many times before. What I'm trying to say is that I want to be a hero because I can. Don't we owe it to the people who can't defend themselves to try? No matter how underqualified we may be? I believe that we all have that responsibility, being human beings, being quirked human beings. He says, eyes burning and shining with purpose. But I understand that there are laws, which is why people like me just have that much more responsibility, don't you think? Seeing as quirkless people are barely intertwined into law. He smiles brightly at Naomasa then, and the officer couldn't help but feel a little breathless. Besides, I love helping people. Why wouldn't I want to become a hero? Naomasa remembered seeing someone else in Midoriya's place for a single second, blonde hair, weary smile, bright blue eyes, before blinking and smiling back. He had unconsciously raised his hand and placed it on his green mess of hair by the time he realized what he was doing, and he couldn't help the surge of protectiveness that welled up in his heart. Aizawa may be his mentor, but the kid's smile reminded him more of Toshinori with each passing day. He doesn't know if he should be happy or terrified. According to Toshi, Nizu had recommended Midoriya-senpai as a potential candidate to be his successor. He had denied, of course. The man had expressed on more than one occasion that he wanted his protege to be hand-picked by him, just like his mentor had done Toshinori, but time was running out, and the experienced hero reluctantly admitted that he couldn't afford to waste any more time standing around. That was when Night Eye stepped in and put out his faulty olive branch. Naomasa is still a little sad at the former sidekick, Suhim, detailing how he had a potential successor in mind that would fit Toshinori's standards. With no other choice, and frankly hopeful from this one piece of contact from his former sidekick, Toshinori had accepted his offer on the condition that if he managed to find a successor before he was introduced to this mystery student, he would leave them alone. Night Eye had readily agreed, and that was that. Even with this inside knowledge, Naomasa couldn't help but think about a universe in which Midoriya-senpai was the successor of All Might, instead of the first quirkless hero. He wonders how it would have gone. Would he be as reckless as Toshi? Would he grasp the power of one for all the same way that Toshi did? Would he thrive under the pressure instead of crumble? Would he grow up to be as broken as Toshinori had? Selfishly, Naomasa is glad that he never has to know. Chisaki never understood the purpose of looking at the smaller picture. Ever since he was taken in by the kind man who saw something more than a threat, he had always loathed the small steps he took that seemed to go nowhere. The Yakuza clan that he so cared for became a ghost story by the time quirks had dominated society, and Chisaki, wanting nothing more than to prove that they were just as much of a threat as the DMN villains and heroes, had yelled at the old man questioning everything he was taught. All that the man had done in response to his outburst was place a hand in his hair, the only one who was allowed to, and hum. Perhaps that was the beginning of his spiral and obsession. Maybe it was something else he didn't exactly remember, or care for that matter. No, all that mattered now was proving that the bigger picture he had willed into his mind would come to fruition, and for that he needed his most important chess piece. He needed Eri and he needed her power. Everything was going to plan. It was going so well, in fact, that by the time New Year's Eve rolled around, he would have his first fully fledged sample of the quark erasing substance. Their formula was in its initial testing stage, and Chisaki was fully confident that they were going to accomplish his dream when the chair he was resting his hand on shook just the slightest bit, his anger rising. It was all coming together until a brat got themselves involved. In response to this tremendous loss, Chisaki had immediately sent out his subordinates to spy on every Yui student under Eraserhead, the pro-hero who almost caught him that day in the alley. According to Chrono, the man's patrol route was nowhere near that area, and his pro-hero job usually commenced late into the night. What this meant was that he was summoned, most likely by the same child who stole Eri. A child who, according to one of his subordinates, now had a name. Midoriya-Izuku. Male, 16 years old, 166 centimeters. Quirkless. A quirkless boy wanting to become a hero? A quirkless boy sullying themselves by bending to the whims of this society? An uninfected specimen walking right into the fray of the infected? Chisaki could only see red. He was not wrong. He could not be wrong. Without these quirks, society would become cleansed once again. Things would go back to the way it was meant to be. So why? Why does this boy threaten to go against all of his beliefs? Taking a deep breath, Chisaki shuts his eyes and calms his heart. He has no time for anger when there is so much to do. He needed to play smart and get Eri back as soon as possible. There is no other option. After a few seconds of simply breathing in filtered, clean air, Chisaki opens his eyes. A calm storm brews behind his molten gaze. Midoriya-Izuku is a dangerous mutation in this already infected world. The best course of action to take now is to simply kill him off before he can become even more of a threat. If he has to sully himself the slightest bit for it to happen, then so be it. It wouldn't be the first time he had to sacrifice something in order to reach his goal. A heart monitor beeps in the back of his head, but he's already too far gone to pay it any mind. Aijuru liked Midoriya-Izuku. The older boy, although clearly a little shy and jittery, was inspiring and manly to a fault. He'd have to be, since he was the first ever quirkless student to participate in the Yui Sports Festival. Not to mention the fact that he got second place. But that isn't the point here, is it? The real point here is that he liked Midoriya, not because of what he achieved, though that's definitely a reason too, but because of what he did that day for Aijuru when he was at his lowest. The Ravenet often thinks back to that day when watching some of Crimson Riot's old interviews. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the kit, but if there was one thing he understood, it was feelings. He felt safe and heard with Midoriya. He also felt like his worries were the size of a peanut when Midoriya put it into perspective. The warm gaze was unbiased and bright, and the days after of sometimes texting Midoriya in order to keep in touch left him feeling grounded when he felt buzzed with energy and restlessness. Whenever he was unsure, he could always count on Midoriya to reassure him in his choices. That was how he finally convinced himself to buy the red hair dye he was eyeing through a salon's window for some time now. Unthinkingly, Aijuru takes a picture of the dye with his phone and sends it to his older friend, biting his lip in a small anxious moment. Kirishima-kun. 5:26 p.m. I finally bought it. Image attached. Midoriya-senpai. 5:27 p.m. About time. Laughing face. Shoulders relaxing, Aijuru absent-mindedly thinks to himself that this would be what having an older brother was like. Someone who listened and encouraged you and made you feel safe in your own skin. Blushing a little at his own thoughts, he shook his head and smiled instead. He could think about this more if he knew when he got into Yui. Once he did, he would have way more time to spend with his senpai, and this whole brother thing can. And never mind. Slapping his cheeks, he refocuses. For now, he needed to look up some YouTube videos on how to successfully bleach and dye his pitch black hair. This was going to take a while. Clenching his fist, he brought it up to his face and closed his eyes with pure determination coursing through his veins. Plus ultra, he thought before opening the first video. Hitoshi never really had that hero obsession phase that most kids seem to have. Ever since he was a young child, he had already been introduced to some pretty hard truths about the world, being in foster care and all. Fortunately, after a couple of hit or misses, he didn't have to stay for much longer thanks to his now family. He had fond memories of when he was 8 years old and newly introduced to his oddball parents. It was one of the most terrifying yet rewarding memories he had, since it was the first time hope was ever introduced into his bleak life. His parents were also freak adopters, which meant he had too many siblings. Alright, he had 6, but that was still a lot. Anyways, heroes. He didn't get the hype at first, but then there was an accident on the way to school, and a cloaked figure in purple got in front of the bus and let out this cool mist thingy that shielded the bus from damage and... So yeah, call it a sudden bout of inspiration, but after that real-time save, he had wanted nothing more than to be a hero. Getting invested into the hero scene made him realize that he wanted to be that momentary hope, be that brief source of comfort to those children waiting for their own chance at a new life, just like a lot of Hitoshi's peers were when he was still in foster care. But then again, he was also a child who had been introduced to some pretty hard truths about the world, and because of that, he knew exactly why it took a couple of hit or misses for him to get a loving family to take care of him. Daytime heroes have amazing quirks and get glorified every day of their lives. Their quirks are cool, functional, and not something that can take away your consent to do things. His quirk, on the other hand, does exactly that. His parents are great, and he loves them, but ever since he had expressed his desire to be a hero, he couldn't deny and ignore their change in behavior. Nothing. But of course, they were just a lot more worried, he guesses. They knew about the stigma surrounding his quirk, and they wanted him to live a simple and good life, but with the career choice he had in mind, that kind of wishful thinking would go straight out the window. He wasn't lying that day, when he had, embarrassingly, cried into Dekairu's arms and told him he had never heard anyone say he could be a hero. His parents more or less responded to his desire with an "Oh. Are you sure, honey?" His siblings were too young to understand the implications and offer real support, and his classmates, well, they found it more funny than serious. That day, when he laid in that alleyway taking kick after punch after insult, he knew in his heart that he was on the brink of giving up. The bitterness and contempt that filled his heart was almost enough to force himself to throw the whole thought of becoming a hero away. But then, Dekairu came and told him to his face that his villain quirk could just as easily be thought of as a hero's quirk, and suddenly everything that he'd been fighting for came back to him. How could he have thought for even a moment that it would be easier to give up? He was doing what he did because he wanted to prove everyone wrong, because he wanted to be a source of light and hope, and he knows that it's possible. He knows because the FING hero in training that had saved him that very day was, in fact, quirkless. The first year's sports festival was permanently downloaded into his phone a week after their encounter, all 3 hours, 37 minutes, and 6 seconds of it. His favorite part of the festival was probably the moment when Dekairu had incapacitated 2 mutant quirk users guarding the flag, climbed up the pole, and then waved the opposite team's flag with a feral grin on his face. Alright, so watching those 2 seemingly advantaged students getting their buttes handed to them by a quirkless person had brought him immense joy and satisfaction. Sue him. He bets that Dekairu had felt the same anyways. After their short encounter, Hitoshi's resolve hardened to the point of pure determination. He was still bitter, sleep-deprived, and a little lonely, but now he had even more reason to prove everyone wrong. After all, if the bottom of the food chain could claw their way up to the top, why couldn't he? He also wanted to see Dekairu again. Hopefully. That would be nice. He tries very hard to avoid idolizing a boy a year older than him. He fails miserably, but no one needs to know that. Absolutely no one. Shut up. Eri's earliest memory was of laughter. She didn't know where it came from, or who was laughing, or why they were laughing. All she knew was that it made her feel warm. It made her feel, a word that rarely came to her. Her next memory is of her quirk going out of control and making her father disappear. Ever since then, Eri has not felt anything but fear, pain, or sadness. The days blurred together like this, in a haze of loneliness and self-hatred. She had never known pure love. She had never known gentle affection. At some point, she had also forgotten how to smile, even though she didn't understand or know it. She always held this quiet hope in her chest, that maybe one day Chisaki would soften his eyes as he looked at her. That maybe one day he would hold her in his arms with no purpose of bringing her to the bad chair. Her hopes were snuffed out quickly from a young age, as she could only watch as that molten gaze looked through her very being. Figuratively and literally, as she was taken apart and put back together again and again and again and again and again. But she deserved it, didn't she? After all, her quirk was a curse. She was a curse. She deserved every bit of pain, every moment of uncertainty and fear, every moment of isolation. Even her own mother walked out on her. If not even she could love someone like her, who would? Eri-chan. A voice called out, and her head lifted to see the smiling face of her hero. Her savior. Her first friend. Are you ready to go? The cultural festival is about to begin in Hafen. Oh, Eri, you look so pretty too. He laughs, walking towards her, smile never falling from his face. Mido, as she coined in her 5-year-old brain, bends down slightly to her level and fixes the creases on her strawberry dress. She can only look on in slight wonder. Ready to go? He asks, putting his arms out, green gaze bright and warm. For so long, that gesture was used as a command. It meant that she had to come here. It meant that she had to be brought somewhere secluded or somewhere bad. It always meant restriction and helplessness. But now it slowly meant safe. She replied, and walked into strong and steady arms. Arms that held her when she was scared and crying. Arms that protected her from the bad things around her. Arms that she was not afraid of. As the green-haired boy lifted her up, Eri let herself rest her head on his shoulder, absorbing the affection and smell of mint and apples. Slowly, she was learning what it felt like to be something other than scared, or pained, or sad. If she only had one wish, it would be for her to learn them alongside her hero. Shoyuta, after being a hero, was a teacher. With that profession came a certain amount of professionalism. He knew that people like Hizashi, who lived to please and be loud and be close, had no qualms with being a little more attached to his students. To the blonde, it was natural to want to know and involve himself in some small way or another to every kid he taught. Although it wasn't to the point of unprofessionalism, it did certainly poke at the boundaries of what Shoyuta considered appropriate. He taught and went through class after class with this mindset in his head, which made it all the more easy to expel students who weren't serious. Other teachers had called it harsh in the beginning. Shoyuta called it thinking objectively and being practical. There was no room for pity and second chances in the world of heroics, and besides, it was rare that he would come into contact with his former students as most were above ground anyways. He cared in his own way, of course, but it never went any deeper than what a teacher would feel for their student. That was how it was, at first, with Midoriya. He means. There was a natural wall put up between them due to circumstances. Teacher and student. Hero and, technically, civilian. Adult and teenager. Shoyuta had no plans of changing his mindset, even after he had expelled the whole class and was left with only a single student. Evidently, somewhere along the way he had fed up, because his house keys currently held charms of a stern black and playful green cat. The unexpected, early birthday gift. It's also to show my appreciation for teaching me. So. Had him so choked up he could only grunt out a thanks and pat the boy's head before turning away. There was also that time he taught the boy how to properly do his tie after being graced with that horrible excuse of a knot for months. And also the other time when he berated him for skipping meals when he felt dizzy once during training. Not to mention the absurd amount of gray hairs and headaches that he's been providing him since day one. Seriously, this was way beyond unprofessional at this point. God, he taught his student how to properly do his tie. What the F dash? And Cammy, don't even get him started with the parent-teacher meetings. Instead of having a professional conversation with Inko Midoriya, they somehow ended up spending one whole hour lamenting over the green-haired menace. She even invited him to have a drink sometime with a dead look in her eyes that eerily resembled his own. How utterly terrifying. "Sensei?" Midoriya called, eyebrows furrowed. The problem child was looking up at him with Eri in his arms, his head tilted slightly to the side in concern. Well, that's logically valid. He was more or less staring at a tree as if he was looking for the answers to the universe. Actually, now that he focuses, there were two students sitting on a tree branch, sitting strangely close together. "Sensei?" Shoyuta goes up to the two, pats Eri's head gently, she hums. Pats Midoriya's head, ack. "Sensei P painful. That's painful," and unwinds his capture tape. "Watch, children," he says ominously. "This is how you protect the chastity of the innocent." The couple in the tree making out passionately separate as a sudden chill rolls up their spine. What was this bad feeling? "I hope you guys find each other in the next life," Midoriya thinks mournfully. Eri sneezes. Let it be known that Katsuki protested every FING step of the way. "Katsuki Bakugu, if you don't haul but right now," his mother says semi-calmly, a storm brewing in her eyes. The old man and Auntie Inko scroll through their phones, paying no mind to what was probably their 50th argument during the mere 30-minute ride from their house to you. The goddamn traitors. "I have my own DMN cultural festival, you know?" He grits out, eyebrows furrowed. His palms were FNG itchy. "You weren't participating anyway." The old hag yells. "You were given a choice by your teacher to participate or not, and you said no, you goddamn brat. Now, instead of mulling around in that DMN school, we can at least accept Inko's invitation to accompany her to Yui's cultural festival." "I could have stayed home," he yells back, "and sneak out of the house to go to the DMN arcade." "You think I didn't notice, you brat?" "Feg. It's better than just laying around. I can get a good workout in too. This is also a good time for us to spend time as a family, damn it. You still want to bail?" "For F's sake, I don't want to." "Katsuki," a stern voice suddenly cuts through, causing both mother and son to clamp their mouths shut. Clenching his jaw, he reluctantly turns his head towards Auntie Inko and hunches his shoulders. She looked FING tired. "Katsuki," she starts. "You don't have to meet or even look at Izuku, okay?" she says. At that, Maru and Mitsuki flinch and direct their attention towards the short woman. "Inko." "Wait, Inko." Katsuki stays still. "I invited you here because this is going to be your school in the future," she continues. "I wanted to give you a chance to witness Yui with your own eyes and assess the level here, you understand?" Katsuki stays silent. "Sweetheart," she starts tiredly. "I believe in you, you know that. However, I also need you to understand that Yui is different from Aldera," she says sternly. "Even though I'm not directly involved, I've seen and felt the atmosphere here through my son, incident after incident after incident. If you go here, understand that you're no longer the big fish in the pond. It's good to be confident, but too much of it can cripple you," she finishes. Unclenching his jaw, his palms slowly settle as his gaze becomes less murderous. "I got it," and he grunts. "Good," she says, and places a gentle hand on his head before heading to the gates. The air settles slightly around the Bakuga family as the short woman confidently walks ahead of them, the two adults sighing. Seriously. If only I had Inko's powers of taming you," the old hag laments, causing Katsuki to snort sarcastically. "Keep dreaming, hag, and she's not even taming me," he grumbles, following his aunt towards Yui's gates. As he looked up at the shining building under the sunlight, his thoughts briefly drift towards the quirkless boy attending the school. It hasn't been long since he last saw him, and yet it still felt like several months had gone by since they last spoke. "Izuku. He reminds himself. He was always a Deku, you were just tricked. Did the impossible getting into this school, seeing as how he was a quirkless loser. He's sure he still is, no matter how literally everyone he gives two sheets about likes to tell him otherwise. Once he gets into Yui, he'll personally be the one to prove otherwise. No matter what Izuku, Deku, said. He refuses to fall for his bullshit a second time. Heroes win, and even when they falter, they keep winning. But as far as Katsuki was concerned, all Izuku Midoriya ever did was lose. And yet to him, he still made it seem like he won in the end, huh? How pathetic. Clenching his fist, the blonde's fiery red eyes look over his future academia with a single thought in mind. I'm going to crush him and be number I can kid a beach. 3:18 p.m. Are you tired yet? Cause I am. Greenie. 3:29 p.m. Thar was meeting with my mom. Hirano, since I didn't want to do a whole concept on my own, principal Nedzu told me to participate in every first-year activity to make up for it. I'm dead. I can kid a beach. 3:30 p.m. Yikes X5. Greenie. 3:30 p.m. My friends in support are making a thing specialized for me and am fearing for my life. Aron. Is this the end of my short life, I wonder? I can kid a beach. 3:31 p.m. Oh, what do you want me to play at your funeral? Greenie. 3:31 p.m. My heart will go on, but the flute rendition, please. It would be a send-off I'd approve of. I can kid a beach. 3:31 p.m. A man with taste, I approve. In all seriousness though, I honestly didn't think you'd know me music. Greenie. 3:32 p.m. So how am I gonna explain all the pro-hero fanfiction I've read until now? I can kid a beach. 3:32 p.m. You cinnamon roll diffs task. Greenie. 3:32 p.m. Slaps self, this bad boy can keep a lot of hidden sides to M. I can kid a beach. 3:32 p.m. F. I'm not even tired anymore, life is great. Have you read that one MT Lady X Kamui Woods fanfic called Giant Steps to Your Heart? Greenie. 3:32 p.m. Inhales sharply, dude. A doesn't remember the last time she felt so excited to talk to someone since her father's accident, but now that she's had a taste, her shoulders relax and settle, releasing the lingering tension that's always been present since she was young. Even if it's only for a moment, she'll savor this feeling for as long as she can. Opening up herself to others is hard, but with Greenie, it just feels easier. Huh, seriously. This DMN quirkless kid, what a menace. She thinks with a smirk. Everyone who has met, interacted, lived with said quirkless menace all get the chills at the same time. Somehow, they all instinctively get it.